In front of him, Saint was barely holding on to life. Her armor was broken and painted red by the crimson dust that flowed from a dozen terrible wounds. The visor of the helmet was shattered, together with the side of her face. One of her ruby eyes was missing, replaced by a jagged black hole. As he ran, a vicious blow of the knight's sword got past the shadow's defense and bit into her shield arm, severing it at the elbow. Saint staggered and awkwardly lashed out with her sword. Then, she took a step back and fell heavily to one knee. The menacing figures of the golems towered above her, approaching to deliver the final blow. The war hammer of the builder rose, ready to fall down like a herald of destruction. The spear of the hunter flew forward like a hungry predator. The shadow slightly tilted her head and faced her death. Her eerily beautiful alabaster face was calm and indifferent. The weapons of the profane constructs reflected in her one remaining eye, growing larger and larger as they drew closer. But in the end, all they managed to pierce is emptiness. The wounded saint dissipated into shadows, summoned back into the nurturing black flames of Sunny's core at the last second. In the next moment, a wall of darkness swallowed the empty space in front of the Crimson Spire, bringing with it pelting rain and hurricane winds. The storm was now upon them. The 6 golems lingered for a few seconds, staring into the raging expanse of the terrifying tempest. They were submerged into its darkness, with only a rare flash of lightning illuminating the world. The wall of rain was so thick that it was almost impossible to see anything through it. Suddenly, they discerned a hint of a movement to their left and swiftly turned, ready to attack the enemy. However, there was no one there. A moment later, though, one of them suddenly shuddered, and then crumbled to the ground, its head flying off into the darkness. The flash of the blade that had decapitated it was so swift and unexpected that none of them had time to react. It also came from the wrong direction. The golems spun and raised their weapons. But instead of an enemy, all they saw was a heavy kunai appearing from the wall of darkness and hitting one of them in the neck. The blow was powerful enough to make the golem stagger, but not that dangerous. The wounded abomination simply raised its hand and tore the dagger out of its coral flesh. As it did, however, the figure of the slayer that stood behind the rest of the golems suddenly fell to her knees. A moment later, her head slowly slid from her neck and tumbled down, revealing a perfect, smooth cut. Sunny, who hid in the darkness, bared his teeth in a vicious grin. Sunny said, "This is my domain, wretches. You are my guests now." 2 dead, 4 to go. Realizing that their enemy was capable of hiding in the shadows and seeing in the dark, the golems changed their tactic. The knight, the stranger, and the hunter shifted to stand in a circle, protecting the priestess with their bodies. The priestess, meanwhile, raised her hands to the skies. In the next moment, a blinding light shot into every direction from her open palms, revealing Sunny, who had been just a few meters away from them and preparing to launch another attack. Damnation! On the bloody battlefield, the remains of the Dreamer army were besieged from all sides. They continued to fight with doomed determination, abandoning all fear and doubt. Even though the black water was already high enough to reach their knees, the humans continued to resist the horde of the frenzied nightmare creatures, slaying 3 for every one of them killed by the terrifying abominations. Illuminating by the radiant light of changing star, not one of them tried to run. Instead, they stalwartly stood their ground and fought. Some were smiling, and some were even singing. As more and more of them fell, forever disappearing under the cold surface of the cursed sea, the black water kept rising. High in the skies above the battlefield, Kai and the quiet dancer were flying through the nets of lightning, dodging the attacks of 3 relentless spire messengers. The terrible monsters were infinitely faster and more powerful than the 2 of them, but had to rely on their wings to propel their massive bodies through the air. Both Kai and his graceful defender flew thanks to magical abilities, and as such, could maneuver better than the winged abominations. This was the only reason why they were still alive. As Kai dodged and evaded the onslaught of deadly attacks, he pelted the messengers with precise shots of his bow. However, none were as lucky as his first one. The black arrow bit into the flesh of the powerful monsters again and again, drinking their blood, but all that achieved was slowing them down a bit. But he didn't care. He never hoped to defeat the harrowing heralds of the spire to begin with. He just wanted to keep them away from the people fighting on the ground. For as long as he could, flying through the storm, struggling against the crushing pressure of the wind and dodging bolts of lightning, Kai gritted his teeth and kept doing just that. Not pausing even for a second after his position was revealed, Sunny lunged forward and delivered a swift thrust, aiming at the closest golem. The creature moved, deflecting the blade of the midnight shard with a choral parody of the noble weapon. Now that the Lord was destroyed, the artificial creatures became considerably less fast and strong. They were no better than carapace scavengers or maybe centurions. Barely more powerful than Sunny himself, thanks to the shadow. However, they were just monsters, while he was something much more deadly. A kid from the outskirts who spent a whole year fighting for his life in the depths of hell. He had the skill, the clarity, and the murderous will of a human. Allowing the midnight shard to slide along the blade of his enemy's sword, Sunny made a step forward and raised his hands. The takai changed its angle and then easily moved past the knight's defenses. Piercing his neck, one twist, and it flew out of the golem's flesh, disintegrating half of his neck in the process. Continuing the motion, Sunny slammed his fist and the hilt of the midnight shard into the golem's face with enough force to break the remaining half.
You have slain.
Using the grounded footwork that he had learned in the countless spars with the Shadow Saint, he quickly repositioned himself and blocked the attack of the hunter's spear. The stranger was still trying to move past the priestess to join the fight. Sunny had planned to use this to his advantage from the start. Before his current opponent could react, Sunny delivered a deadly counterattack, cutting off one of his arms. A moment later, he pulled the takai back, thrust it forward, piercing the hunter through the chest, and then pulled it up, cutting the cursed creature apart.
You have slain and awakened.
The priestess lunged forward, wishing to rip him apart with her bare hands, but was suddenly pulled back by the invisible string that had wrapped itself around her neck at some point in the fight. That was all the time Sunny required. As pieces of coral fell to the ground, the spell spoke once again.
You have.
With the priestess dead, the stranger was left in the darkness once again. He hesitated and raised his shield, looking at the spot where the enemy had been just a second ago and listening to the sound of water through the roaring storm. However, in the next second, something rustled behind him. The stranger spun and delivered a wide horizontal slash with his sword, but then paused, staring down. His sword hand was gone, cut cleanly at the wrist. Then, something flushed through the rain and streaked across his body. The golem staggered and then fell down, crumbling into halves as it fell. Breathing heavily, Sunny lowered the midnight shard and looked at the 6 piles of crimson coral that were disappearing beneath the black water in front of him. Then he spat. Sunny snarled, "Who told you that you can hurt my shadow, bastards?" Turning around, he saw a bolt of lightning hit the gargantuan gates of the Crimson Spire. Arcs of electricity danced on its stone surface and then dissipated, leaving a ghostly afterglow in their wake. Only the shapes of the 7 stars continued to shine as though full of energy. Clutching his burning chest, Sunny looked at the black water that was already up to his knees and headed toward the spire. As the Dreamer army was drowning in the rising waters of the Cursed Sea and the insatiable tide of monsters, Sunny approached the Crimson Tower. Far away from the rest of them, completely alone, submerged in roaring darkness. He struggled against the seething mass of black waves and the hurricane winds to cross the last few meters that separated him from the shining star sigil engraved into its gates. Finally, his hand touched the cold surface of the ancient stone. Wiping the rainwater off his pale face, Sunny stared at the radiant shapes of the 7 stars. Sunny muttered, "This better work." Summoning the first of the Oath keys, he lingered for a moment, and then carefully inserted it into the black chasm of the keyhole. Separated from him by the vast expanse of the swelling sea of darkness, the surviving sleepers desperately fought the advancing horde of monsters. The black water had already reached their waists, making it hard to move. The army was trying to retreat up the slope of the crimson coral, but the pursuing sea was much faster than them. Changing Star was still slaying one monster after another, her radiance only growing brighter in the tenebrous hell of the furious storm. Raindrops were evaporating as they touched her brilliant skin, its incandescence making even arching bolts of lightning seem pale and bleak. Suddenly, an almost imperceptible ripple ran across the surface of the black water. A gust of cold wind blew over the forgotten shore, sending a shiver running through the hearts of countless creatures. Moving on to the next star, Sunny summoned the second key and put it into the lock. Nothing terrible happened, so he struggled through the water to reach the third one. Sunny muttered, "Terrible? What would that even look like? What can be more terrible than my current situation?" As though to answer his question, somewhere behind him, a black tentacle suddenly rose out of the seething waves and blindly whipped through the air. Crashing into a mound of coral, it easily shattered it. A rain of debris fell into the water. Just a moment later, countless others followed the first one. Noticing this new development through the eyes of his shadow, Sunny cursed. Sunny snapped, "Me and my big damn mouth." Luckily, the tentacles were some distance away, somewhere near the remains of the 7 golems he had slain. But as the sea rose, they started slowly moving in his direction. Hurriedly inserting the third key, Sunny dashed to the 4th star. Another oath key slid into its lock. The water was now even higher, forcing him to struggle against its weight. A strong gust of wind hit Sunny in the back, almost causing him to crash headfirst into the stone gates. As he put the 5th key into the keyhole, the tentacles were already alarmingly close. Sunny cursed, "Curse it all." Sunny inserted the 6th oath key into the lock and dove into the black water, swimming toward the last one. Just a few moments before the mass of twisting tentacles descended on him, he found the last shining star and drove the 7th key into its center. Suddenly, the world shuddered. The whole forgotten shore trembled. Out on the battlefield, the surviving humans froze for a second, startled by the sudden change that rippled through the world. The furious onslaught of the wind died down. The torrential flood of rain stopped. The continuous, deafening roar of the thunderstrikes grew quiet. The terrible storm seemed to have ended as suddenly as it had appeared, dissipating into nothingness like a fragile mirage. Even the nightmare creatures attacking them stumbled and paused for a moment, staring at the sky. And then the dark veil of clouds was broken by a blindingly bright ray of sunlight. As soon as it happened, the restless black water stopped rising and then flowed in reverse. The cursed sea was retreating.
Grab.
As soon as Sunny put the last oath key into the 7th lock, the whole Crimson Spire shuddered. An indescribable sound came from its depths, echoing through the darkness of the storm like a heavy, mournful sigh. And then, the gargantuan gates opened. The giant slabs of ancient stone moved for the first time in thousands of years. The problem was, the gates opened outward, slamming into Sunny and dragging him through the mass of black water with terrible speed. The unexpected blow threw him off his feet and almost caused him to drown, not to mention the fact that it hurt like hell. The opening gate brought him away from the damned tentacles, at least. After a while, Sunny was thrown onto the slope of a tall coral mound. Coughing a few times, he tiredly crawled a few meters up, then fell on the rough surface of the coral and turned around. What Sunny saw made him blink, then open his eyes wide and stare in disbelief. The dark sea was being sucked into the spire. The black water was flowing in reverse, rushing into the enormous doorway. The twisting tentacles and the harrowing creature they belonged to were carried away by that current, disappearing into that blackness too. The strange thing was, the amount of water entering the Crimson Spire was much larger than what should have been possible. Sunny expected to see it fill the Cyclopean Tower, but instead, it simply flowed inside and seemed to disappeared, as though swallowed by the spire and banished into the depths of the earth. Just a few moments later, the lever of the dark sea began to fall. The storm died down, and the impenetrable veil of clouds was torn apart, allowing sunlight to illuminate the world once again. And in a few minutes, the cursed sea was no more. Sunny stared at the clear surface of the crimson coral, which had been covered by the black waves not too long ago. The bottomless dark ocean was gone without a trace. Even the black whirlpool that had surrounded the island was not there anymore, revealing a deep, uneven, empty semblance of a moat. Then Sunny stared at the sky where a furious white sun was hovering right above the tip of the Crimson Spire. A stunned thought entered his mind. Sunny breathed. Did we do it? Did he actually destroy the Dark Sea? The Dark Sea was gone, and all the horrors that dwelt in its cursed depths were gone with it too. The world was bathed in pure sunlight. The surface of the labyrinth suddenly became vibrant and bright, with stark shadows hiding under the jagged pillars of the crimson coral. The furious white sun burned above the Crimson Spire, as though frozen in the middle of the sky. Sunny even had to cover his eyes for a few seconds. Laying on the ground, he allowed himself a few moments of rest. A short laugh escaped from his lips. Sunny whispered, "I actually did it." Speak about the unlikely events. Unfortunately, he couldn't really rest yet. The battle wasn't over. The horde of nightmare creatures was not defeated yet. And somewhere in the spire, the Crimson Terror itself was not defeated either. With a deep sigh, Sunny collected himself and rose to his feet. They were almost there. They almost escaped. Now all that was left was to make one final push, even if it was going to be the hardest one yet. Looking at the tall mound of coral towering above him, he squinted against the light and began climbing it. Was it always so bright? As Sunny climbed, he summoned the runes and glanced at them. Shadows, marble saint. Sunny breathed, "Thank gods." He knew that saint was all right, but still wanted to check. The taciturn demon had been heavily damaged and was bound to spend a long time restoring herself. However, her existence was not in danger. Then his eyes slid lower. Shadow fragments, 999 1000. Crap, Sunny muttered, not like I can do anything about it now. Full of unease, he continued his climb and soon reached the very top of the coral pillar. Standing on it, Sunny looked in the direction of the Dreamer army. Something wet suddenly fell on his hand. Looking down, he saw a drop of blood rolling off his skin. A moment later, another fell on the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud. Surprised, Sunny raised his hand and swiped it across his upper lip. It came away wet with blood. A nosebleed. What the hell? Come to think of it, why did he feel so weak? As Sunny stared at his hand in confusion, a violent ripple suddenly ran through his shadow. Across the deep moat that surrounded the island, the remnants of the Dreamer army were at the precipice of turning the tide of battle in their favor. Just a few minutes ago, they had been drowning in the rising flood of black water and the relentless onslaught of the horde lost in the fury of a cataclysmic storm. But now, things were different. The storm was no more and the dark sea had retreated. The sun shined brightly in the sky, drowning the battlefield in its light, bathed in it. The nightmare creatures seemed to become hesitant, almost sluggish. They were not giving up, however. The monsters continued to attack the humans in a frenzied rage, their claws and fangs reaping one life after another. But the survivors of the Dreamer army were repaying every loss tenfold. Reinvigorated by the exhilarating gift of sudden salvation, they steeled their hearts and fought with zeal, fervor, and murderous will. More and more nightmare creatures fell to their blades. And the horde did not seem to be endless anymore. The sleepers did not know why the storm had dissipated and why the cursed sea had retreated, but their faith in changing star now burned even brighter. She had promised to guide them out of this hell, and somehow, even the black water had capitulated to her radiant light. The victory was not impossible anymore. They could practically taste it. But Nephise herself suddenly stumbled and slowed her sword dance. A confused, alarmed frown appeared on her face. Dodging the claws of an attacking abomination, she thrust her sword into its maw, then jumped back. Free of the swarming monsters for a few short moments, she lowered her sword and looked at the sky. High above her, Kai was still alive. Somehow, Kai muttered, "What is happening?" He had spent so long flying at a terrible speed, struggling against the crushing wind, dodging bolts of lightning and the cursed spire messengers, pushing the limits of both his body and mind. The exhaustion was catching up with him now, making it hard to think, let alone react. He really didn't feel well. His whole body ached, and his vision was slowly turning blurry. A sickening feeling of weakness permeated his body. The storm had come out of nowhere and then disappeared without a trace. The skies were blindingly bright. That was a relief, but the damn abominations were still there. At least they didn't look tireless anymore. In fact, the messengers seemed to be in as much of a sorry state as Kai himself. He wanted to flatter himself and assume that it was because of his arrows. He had wounded the damned monsters many times after all. But no, it didn't make any sense. They seemed able to resist the effect of the blood arrow before, at least to a large extent. So why would it change now? Something is wrong. Using the sun to blind his enemies, Kai dove into the light and dashed to the side, narrowly avoiding the claws of one of the messengers, or so he thought. In reality, it wasn't narrow at all. He dodged it with a lot of room to spare. The quiet dancer didn't even need to get involved. Kai wondered, are they growing slower? With a sudden feeling of unease, Kai hesitated for a split second and then reduced his speed to take a good look at the terrifying creature. What he saw made him scowl. The messenger looked wrong. Its glassy black eyes were erratic and senseless. They were seeping with blood which flowed down the black feathers like a crimson stream. There were two other similar streams coming from the monster's ears. The muscles of his pale body were spasming, rolling under the white skin like panicking worms. As Kai watched, the messenger suddenly opened its beak in a silent scream. A moment later, a flood of blood erupted out of it and dispersed in the wind like red mist. Then, the creature convulsed one last time and lost control of its wings. Not even trying to correct itself, the terrible abomination plunged down. Kai flinched and opened his eyes wide in terror. The spire messenger was dead. Sunny swayed a little and then looked down at his shadow. The shadow seemed to be in pain. It was slumped, clutching at its chest with one hand and waving at him with the other. When it noticed that Sunny was staring at it, it desperately pointed to itself. Sunny muttered, "What? What is this guy trying to say?" Was he having a heart attack? No, of course not. That would be ridiculous. Shadows didn't have hearts. What was it pointing at then? Sunny scowled. The shadow was his reflection. So maybe it was not pointing at its own heart, but at his. But his heart felt fine. What else was there to point at? Suddenly, his eyes widened. The soul core. The soul core usually overlapped over a human's heart. With a shudder, Sunny dove into the soul sea. Instead of the usual peace and quiet, he was met by ominous chaos. The dark waters that were always tranquil and still were now restless and turbulent. They rippled and surged as though under the assault of the invisible winds. Up above, the spheres of light that represented his memories shimmered and blinked, as though about to be extinguished. The black sun of the shadow core was trembling. He could almost see tiny cracks appear on its transparent surface. Only the silent shadows were still the same, not disturbed by the approaching disaster at all. They stood motionlessly, staring at him with no expression on their black, lifeless faces. Sunny did not pay them any attention and stared at the shadow core with wide eyes, dumbfounded. Soul damage. I am receiving soul damage. He was under the effect of a continuous soul attack, escaping the unquiet sea in panic. Sunny wiped the blood off his face and looked around with a grim expression. He was even paler than usual. Sunny demanded, "What the hell is attacking me?" After a few moments, he suddenly shivered, stunned by a chilling revelation, and then looked up at the blinding discus of the sun. He had not been wrong. Its light was indeed much brighter than it had been before. The skies of the forgotten shore, which had always been gray, were now almost white, full of merciless heat and radiance. It looked as though someone had erased reality itself, leaving behind nothing but an endless white void. With each second, it was growing more and more incandescent. Sunny breathed, the sun. The source of the soul attack was not a nightmare creature. It was sunlight itself. Anywhere it reached, the souls of living creatures were being slowly eroded and destroyed. And since the sun was now directly above them, at high noon, there was almost nowhere where it couldn't reach. There was no escape from it, except for... Turning around, Sunny stared at the opened gates of the Crimson Spire. Behind them, welcoming darkness promised shade and safety. This was the only place where he could hide from the annihilating sun. Sunny called, "The army." Spinning around, he peered across the moat. Out there on the battlefield, the nightmare creatures had stopped their endless onslaught. Now they were stumbling and swaying as though drunk. Many had already fallen to the ground, blood streaming from their orifices. Their souls had been destroyed, and they were dead. The surviving warriors of the Dreamer army were staring at them in bewilderment, their distant figures full of both relief and confusion. Sunny wanted to scream, warning them of the terrible danger they were in, but knew that he was too far away for anyone to hear him. From the tall mound of coral he was standing on, he could see the graceful shining figure in their midst. He knew that Nephis must have figured out what was going on by now, but she didn't know that the gates of the spire were open. Sunny urged himself, "Think, think." Sunny lingered for a few seconds and then raised his hand. A moment later, a clear ringing of a silver bell spread across the labyrinth, rolling over the remains of the Dreamer army. Far away on the battlefield, Nephis spun and looked in his direction. Sunny shouted, come on, Neph." Sunny rang the silver bell again and waved his hand in the air. However, there was no need. Changing Star had already moved, thrusting her sword toward the spire. In the next moment, the Dreamer army lunged forward. Sleepers were running with all the speed they could muster, following the command of their lady. Sunny exclaimed, "Yes, wait, what is she doing?" Nephis herself did not follow her soldiers. Instead, she turned around and ran in the opposite direction, to the distant pillar of coral that they had left at the start of this mess. Sunny's heart skipped a bit when he realized that she was going back for Cassie. But there was nothing he could do to help, not anymore. Sunny whispered, "Good luck." Jumping down from the mound, he rolled on the ground and ran toward the darkness of the spire's doorway without looking back. However, before Sunny could reach it, he saw something falling down from the skies. Sunny breathed, "What the?" A ragged human figure slammed into the crimson coral and rolled several times before coming to a stop, then remained still. Sunny dashed toward it, quickly recognizing the bright colors of Kai's armor. To his relief, the charming young man was still alive, if barely conscious. A graceful rapier was worriedly zipping in the air around him, the steel of its blade bleak and devoid of the usual luster. The two of them must have been high up in the sky when the soul erasure had begun, much closer to its source, and so suffered more than those of them on the ground. Not wasting any time, Sunny grabbed Kai by the collar and dragged him toward the open gates of the spire. The quiet dancer followed. Soon, the three of them reached the border between light and darkness. Without hesitating even for a second, Sunny dove into the cool shade and made a few steps to get deeper into its shelter, and fell to the ground. Sunny let out a breathless gasp only now. Protected from the annihilating sunlight by the solid mass of the ancient tower, he realized how terrible his condition had been, but no more. His soul was finally at peace once again, whatever wounds dealt to it already healing. Kai was still alive, too. Sunny muttered, "Lucky bastard." He added, "Thank gods, that fool owes me big time now." Breathing heavily, he checked on the unconscious archer, then sat down and stared at the blindingly bright landscape outside. Were the others going to make it? A few seconds later, something suddenly flashed through the air. It was Castor, falling on his knees near them. He glanced at Sunny with tired eyes and then gently placed an unconscious sleeper he had carried with him on the ground. Without saying anything, both of them then turned to the gates of the spire and looked into the light. Seconds passed in torturous silence. And then a human silhouette appeared out of the brightness. And then another and another. The survivors of the Dreamer army had reached the island and dashed toward the life-saving darkness of the gargantuan tower. Soon, they crossed the distance separating them from the gates and dove into their shade. Sunny watched, something sharp moving in his chest. A torturous eternity later, he finally saw the familiar figure in white armor appear at the doorstep of the colossal structure. Carrying Cassie, Nephis entered the shadows. She was the last one to come. Looking at them and at the small crowd of sleepers gathered at the border between darkness and light, Sunny was finally able to exhale. They made it. The battle for the Crimson Spire was over. Now all they had to do was find the gateway hidden somewhere inside the ancient tower, and survive the wrath of its master. Sitting on the cold stone floor, Sunny inhaled deeply and looked at the people that surrounded him. All of them were exhausted, wounded, covered in blood, dirt, barely staying conscious. Their armor was broken and torn, and their faces were deathly pale. They sat on the ground, too tired to move or talk, breathing heavily, and stared down with empty eyes. There were so few of them left. But also much more than he had expected. Around 100 sleepers had survived the battle of the Crimson Spire. They were the strongest, the bravest, but mostly the luckiest warriors of the Dreamer army. 4/5 of it had been eviscerated in the slaughter, not to mention another 500 or so that had died during the bloody struggle for the throne of the Bright Castle. This 100 was all that remained of more than 1,000 humans that had been surviving on the Forgotten Shore before Changing Star had arrived in the Dark City like a brilliant omen of disaster, like a herald of ruinous change. But Sunny was appalled and horrified as much as he was surprised and elated. He had honestly thought that the number of people who would make it this far was going to be in the single digits. Looking around, he searched for familiar faces. Nephi's and Cassie were there, of course. So was Kai. Effie was slumped against a wall, dressed only in her white chiton, which was now torn and painted completely red with blood. Her armor seemed to have been completely destroyed. Castor was also there, bandaging a shallow wound on his shoulder. Compared to other survivors, he seemed strangely clean. However, his armor was seriously damaged, too. It seemed that even incredible speed had not been enough to avoid the fury of the nightmare horde. Seishin stood slightly apart from the rest of them, surrounded by a dozen surviving handmaidens. The beautiful woman was heavily injured, the luster of her skin and sparkling eyes growing bleak and dim. From what Sunny could see, she was barely alive. He also noticed Eiko, who was sitting on the floor wiping tears off her delicate face. But there were also many people whom he did not see. The scarred hunter who had welcomed them into the outer settlement after their long expedition was dead. So was Park, his nonchalant friend who had been responsible for turning Effie into a folk hero with his tales. The talkative watchman who had asked Sunny about his opinion on who could have killed Horus were now dead too. So was the young man who had thought that talking to Sunny was a headache. Stev, the ample giant that had been in charge of the memory market during Gunlog's reign, did not make. Perhaps this was why Ake, his friend, was now silently shedding tears. Even Gemma, the dauntless leader of the Dark City Hunters, had perished. Sunny did not know what could have killed the seemingly immortal man, but suspected that his last hunt had been a truly terrifying sight to behold. Most of the people Gemma had brought to Changing Star's faction with him were now dead too, and so many more. Their absence pressed down on survivors like an unseen weight. But those who survived had no time for sorrow, at least not now. They weren't free of this nightmare yet. In fact, there had just entered the very belly of the beast. Turning away from the 100 sleepers, Sunny looked into the depths of the Crimson Spire. Once, the entire tower must have been hollow, but now there were growths of coral everywhere inside. They resembled frozen waterfalls of blood, as though rivers of it had once streamed from the top of the spire and then suddenly turned solid. Because of that, it was hard to see what hid in the depths of the cyclopic construct. Further away, the interior of the tower was shrouded in the cold darkness. Lingering for a few moments, Sunny decided not to send his shadow to explore. The Crimson Terror had already proven its ability to hurt the It, so he was unwilling to risk the well-being of his invaluable helper. Instead, he glanced at Neph. Changing Star was peering into the growing brightness that drowned the Forgotten Shore. By now, the light of day outside was almost blinding. On her face, there was a strangely thoughtful expression. As Sunny watched, she turned around and raised her head, looking in the direction of the spire's tip. After a while, she frowned and then faced the surviving humans. Her calm voice echoed in the darkness of the ancient tower.
It's time to go. Gather your strength. We are almost there.
The sleepers looked at her with tired eyes, the light of hope igniting in them with renewed strength. Slowly, they rose to their feet. Those who were relatively fine supported those who were seriously wounded. Those who had lost consciousness were being carried by their friends or fellow warriors. Soon, the procession of humans headed deeper into the spire. Nephi's was walking at the front, holding Cassie by the hand. Somehow, Sunny ended up side by side with them, looking at the two young women. He wanted to say something, but no words came to his mind. Instead, Neph was the one who spoke. Glancing at Sunny, she hesitated for a while and then said,
"Thank you for ringing that bell, and for everything."
He looked at her for a long time and then shrugged. Sunny replied, "There's no need to thank me. We are allies, are we not?" She smiled slightly and remained silent after that. Soon, they passed through the barrier of coral and approached the center of the spire. There, the dark sea was imprisoned under an indomitable seal. In front of them was a vast pool of black water. Its surface was perfectly still and flat, like that of a harrowing mirror made from pure darkness. Although the water was opaque and no one could see how far down that gargantuan well went, Sunny felt as though it was unimaginably deep. He felt that it reached such depths that mere thought of light would be impossible there. As they watched in solemn silence, a subtle ripple spread across the surface of the imprisoned sea. It was as though it was straining to spill over the edges of the pool and break free. However, the invisible powers that held it down were too mighty to overcome even for this vast, boundless, inconceivable creature. Turning away from the eerie black mirror, Sunny peered into the darkness and frowned. Hidden in the shadows, far away from the light of human lanterns, countless figures were standing motionlessly, staring at them. At first, Sunny wanted to shout to warn everyone, but after observing the silent figures for a few moments, he changed his mind. Hidden in darkness, countless coral golems were staring mindlessly into the distance. They were very similar to the creatures he had fought to get to the star sigil, but also different, because they weren't copies of ancient heroes, just that of mundane people. As such, they wouldn't be too dangerous. A single sleeper could fight dozens with ease, let alone the experienced, powerful warriors of the Dreamer army. More than that, the golems did not seem to be hostile. Some of them stood motionlessly, while some aimlessly wandered about. These sad, empty things were even more lifeless than echoes. He felt that they weren't really creatures even, just physical manifestations of the Crimson Terror's madness, perhaps, a representation of its broken psyche and scattered thoughts. He was sure that each of these golems represented one of the souls that had been sacrificed to the artificial sun and had once flowed through its vessel, becoming a part of it, forever. There were thousands of them, and even more had to be hidden somewhere out of sight. Lingering for a bit, Sunny informed Nephi's of his discovery. She frowned and glanced into the darkness, then nodded. Nephi said, "We will be careful." Now that they had a better understanding of the ground level of the Crimson Spire, it became clear that the gateway was not on it. To find it, the remains of the Dreamer army were going to have to ascend higher. There were no stairs or lifting mechanisms in sight, but luckily, many of the twisting coral pillars were wide enough for several people to walk on them, and not as steep as to make things too difficult. The sleepers could use them to easily reach the next level. However, as soon as Sunny stepped forward, Neph suddenly pulled him back and shouted,
"Everyone back."
Just a moment later, a wide ray of blinding light fell from somewhere above and swiped across the interior of the Crimson Spire, annihilating the tranquil darkness. It didn't take a genius to realize that the ray was imbued with the same soul-destroying property as the deadly beams of sunlight outside. Only this one seemed much more powerful. It was also different, although its movements were erratic and strange. They were unmistakably aimed at the exhausted mass of human invaders and full of intent. Nephi's commanded, "Hide in the shadows." Swiftly, the sleepers dove behind growths of coral and pressed themselves against them. A few unfortunate ones lingered for too long and were exposed to the light. They didn't scream or struggle, just fell down to the ground, their lives extinguished in a split moment. The rest froze, consumed by tense fear. Sunny found himself leaning against a slightly inclined pillar of coral, Neph and Cassie by his side. Carefully looking out, he saw the deadly beam of light grow dim and dissipate. A moment later, however, several more fell from above, tearing the darkness apart. But that was not all. Guided by the light, the mass of coral golems suddenly surged forward, moving toward the place where the Dreamer army was hiding. Their movements, which were aimless and mindless before, were now full of malevolent will. Crap. Turning to Nephi's, he summoned the Midnight Shard and asked. Sunny demanded, "What now?" She lingered for a bit, and then said evenly,
Someone will have to attack the Crimson Terror directly to draw its attention away.
Sunny smiled, feeling a strong sense of déjà vu. Sunny asked, "And who might that be?" Changing Star sighed and took a step back, summoning her silver sword. Nephi's conceded, "Me. It has to be me." He frowned, feeling very reluctant to say his next words. But in the end, he still couldn't help but say them. Sunny demanded, "Are you crazy? That's a fallen terror we're talking about." Nephi's didn't answer, instead looking up as though trying to discern the source of the blinding rays of annihilating light. Sunny gritted his teeth and added. Sunny retorted, "All right, whatever. Say someone really needs to distract that thing. But why does it have to be you alone? Because you are the great daughter of the immortal Flame Clan. Don't tell me that you started to believe in your own bullcrap." Neph gave him a strange look and then shook her head. Nephi's replied, "No, it can only be me because of my sword." Sunny stared at the silver longsword, confused. A lifetime ago, after their first meeting on the Forgotten Shore, Nephi's and Cassie had told him about their memories. The sword in particular had an extremely rare enhancement.
I am the only human on the Forgotten Shore who has a memory that grants them a measure of protection against soul attacks. So I am the only one who can approach the terror and survive.
It was hard to debate against logic. Still, Sunny was not done voicing his objections. Only that changing star didn't give him a chance to. Turning to Cassie, she took the blind girl by the hand and said,
Cass, give me your wing cloak.
A few seconds later, the transparent fabric of the dark wing appeared on her shoulder. Without wasting any time, she then looked at Sunny. Nephi's ordered, "Once I'm gone, lead the people to the gateway. Make sure that everyone escapes." With that, Nephi's bent her knees, and then jumped with all her might. Supported by the enchanted cloak, she shot up with considerable speed, then pushed herself off the pillar of coral and flew into the darkness. The ray of light swiped in her direction, but Changing Star somehow managed to dodge it, crashed into another coral growth, and launched herself off of it a moment before another annihilating beam of light had reached it. With most rays now pursuing Nephi's as she leaped from one coral pillar to another, ascending higher and higher, the Dreamer army could once again move. Gritting his teeth, Sunny glanced at the 100 frightened people and yelled. Sunny bellowed, "Follow me." Sunny had never expected to become a leader of anyone, let alone of 100 desperate people. But now, that was exactly the situation he found himself in. To add insult to injury, he was really the best person for the job, not because of any kind of leadership qualities, but simply for the fact that he could see in the dark. Now that the rays of soul-destroying light were led away by Nephi's, he could also let his shadow free and send it forward to explore and search for the gateway. So if anyone could guide the remains of the Dreamer army to it, it was him. Sunny muttered, "How the hell?" Hiding his unease deep inside, Sunny projected nothing but absolute confidence and shouted for everyone to follow him. Surprisingly, the sleepers did just that without voicing any objections. Sunny mused, "Confidence is easily confused for competence, I guess." Of course, the fact that he was affiliated with Changing Star in some capacity helped a lot, even if most people were not completely sure how and to what extent. Taking Cassie's hand, Sunny dove out of his cover and dashed toward a wide, spiraling coral root that reached high into the darkness above. He could hear the sound of footsteps following him from behind. The Dreamer army was on the move once again, jumping on the root. Sunny sent the shadow forward and glanced at the approaching sea of coral golems. There was still time. He ran forward, using the coral growth as stairs. A second later, he yelled. Sunny bellowed, "Those at the back, ready your weapons." They did so while the first rows of sleepers followed Sunny up. Almost everyone had time to climb onto the root by the time the first of the golems showed up. The coral figure stumbled from the darkness, only to be met by a flash of a sword. It crumbled instantly, offering almost no resistance. But a moment later, several more appeared, and then more and more. The sleepers destroyed the first wave to buy themselves a few moments and then jumped onto the root, then dashed away, soon catching up with the rest of the survivors. At the head of them, Sunny hesitated for a moment. Thanks to the shadow, he knew that the wide coral growth they were ascending was soon going to twist upward at an almost vertical angle and grow much more narrow. Luckily, there was another one crossing it just a few meters ahead, separated by a very small gap. Picking Cassie up, he took a step forward and jumped, landing on the other root. Then turned around and moved in the opposite direction to the one they had been going, but still upward. Behind him, the sleepers repeated his jump, and down below, the wave of golems was already climbing on the twisting roots to pursue them. Sunny grumbled, "Damn it, I guess they can climb." He ran forward, struggling against the steep incline, then suddenly froze and looked up. There, a few dozen meters away, a wide gallery circled around the empty expanse of the Crimson Spire, and on it, another mass of golems was surging in the direction of the Dreamer army. Countless twisted figures were appearing from the chaotic mess of crimson coral and rushing forward, searching for a path to reach them. Many fell off the edge of the gallery and plunged down, to explode into shards once they hit the floor, but some fell right on the root he was standing on. Gritting his teeth, Sunny looked back and noticed a familiar tall figure close by. Effie stared at him tiredly and forced out a smile.
What is it now?
He put Cassie on the ground and gently pushed her toward the huntress. Sunny said, "Take care of her for me, all right." Effie waved a hand, letting him know that she got it. Sunny watched the two of them for a moment, then turned around and summoned the Midnight Shard. A few seconds later, he reached the first golem and slashed it with his sword. The golem's body offered some resistance, but no more than a mundane creature would. It almost disintegrated under his assault, crumbling easily into a pile of broken coral. Sunny muttered, "Not too bad." Curiously, the spell did not congratulate him on the kill. Just as Sunny had suspected, these things were not really living creatures. That was going to make things a tiny bit easier. Running past the destroyed construct, Sunny soon approached another one and pushed it off the root with one strike of the Midnight Shard's pommel. The golems were not that dangerous, at least not in small numbers. He led the Dreamer army forward, climbing higher and higher. Every couple of minutes, they would have to leave one route and make use of another, sometimes moving across stone galleries that were situated here and there on the walls of the Crimson Spire. At some point, both the vanguard of the human procession and its rear became embroiled in a rolling melee with the sea of coral golems. Those in the middle only had to keep their eyes on the layers of coral and stone structures overhead to make sure that nothing fell on them. This battle was not too terrible, however. The constructs were slower and weaker than even the mundane humans whose visage they were meant to recreate, not to mention almost completely mindless. Not a single human had fell to their attacks yet. That was not to say that surviving the onslaught of countless golems was easy. Somewhere high above, meanwhile, the flashes of white light slowly turned into one continuous, radiant halo. Nephis was probably already approaching the very pinnacle of the ancient tower. The fact that none of the annihilating rays had returned to attack the sleepers served as proof that she was still alive, drawing the attention of the terror away from them. Sunny muttered, "Where are you? Where are you?" At the head of the Dreamer army, Sunny cut through another golem and suppressed a curse. Where was the damn gateway? And just he thought that, the shadow finally found what it had been looking for all that time, their way back to the real world. Out there in the darkness, a vast balcony was built into the wall of the tower, reaching almost to the center of the gargantuan structure. On its surface, broken pillars of marble were overgrown by the ever-present streaks of crimson coral. They led to a circular dais, with a wide iron ring submerged into its stone surface. Around the ring, a beautiful pattern of runes was shimmering with familiar light. They were just like those runes that every Awakened had seen countless times when communicating with the spell. But that wasn't the first reason why Sunny had noticed it. The most unusual thing about the dais was that unlike everything else inside of the spire, it was utterly devoid of growths of crimson coral. The stone surface surrounding the ring was strangely clean and untouched by it. Looking at the shimmering runes and the iron rings through his shadow, Sunny felt something move in his heart. He was sure that this was the gateway. They were so close. As he watched it, the whole spire suddenly shuddered. Massive pieces of coral broke off and fell down, crashing into other branches down below. Suddenly, the darkness that surrounded the Dreamer army became less impenetrable. High above them, the radiant halo of light became several times more bright. Nephis had reached the Crimson Terror. With a somber grimace, Sunny escaped from his reverie and dashed forward, slicing several golems as he went. The frightened sleepers followed, entrusting their fates into his hands. As more and more tremors ran through the ancient tower and several enormous pillars of coral completely collapsed, they ascended even higher and approached the vast balcony. And then, finally, Sunny jumped down and landed on solid stone. Shattering a few golems, he cleared enough space for others to follow and watched several more people reach the balcony. One after another, the sleepers jumped off the treacherous coral and joined him. Those who were the first to catch up repelled the attacking golems to let the others come down. Soon, all 100 of them were on the balcony. And just in time, a few seconds later, a tremendous piece of debris fell from above, pulverizing the branch of coral they had used to get there. Sunny lingered for a few moments, watching as crimson pieces rained down, and then turned away with a determined expression. Sunny bellowed, "Come on, we're almost there." The remains of the Dreamer Amri cut through the mass of golems and escaped it. Running with all the speed they could manage, the crowd of young men and women approached the gateway and froze, stunned by the sight of it, hypnotized by it. In front of them was the hope that they had forgotten for so long, the torturous promise of freedom that had taunted them every day, hidden away in the terrifying, looming silhouette of the Crimson Spire. Their way home, salvation. Most of them had spent so long on the forgotten shore that the thought of ever being able to escape it became nothing more than a distant dream. Even when they had followed Changing Star and chose to believe her promises, salvation was just a concept, an idea. Now that they saw it as a real thing, many did not know how to react. Well, Sunny was there to make the process easier. Sunny bellowed, "What are you staring at, idiots? Pick up your jaws and move. Battle formation. Protect the rear. Wounded and non-combatants go first. Everyone else holds off the damn golems and then follows. One at a time, bastards." Coming back to their senses thanks to his angry shout, the sleepers quickly reorganized themselves. Those who could still fight faced away from the gateway and formed a defensive line, protecting the wounded with their bodies. Those who couldn't help the people in the worst condition enter the iron ring. Sunny watched as the first human was placed in the center of the gateway. A moment later, the runes surrounding the ring flashed with shimmering light. The body of the sleeper suddenly shone too. The ghostly shine was dim at first, but then grew brighter and brighter. Soon, it was hard to distinguish the shape of the human body at the center of that light. And then, the light dissipated, much like a memory or an echo would, leaving nothing behind. After all these years, all that suffering, all that loss, the first sleeper had finally escaped the forgotten shore. Looking through the emptiness left by the disappearance, Sunny realized that he had forgotten to breathe. A second later, an exhilarated cheer rose above the crowd of humans, the intensity of emotion in their voices. No words existed to describe the complicated, overwhelming conflagration of feelings burning in the chests of the survivors of the Dreamer army at that moment. Well, at least Sunny had none. In the next moment, the pursuing wave of golems crashed into the defensive line, and the next human stepped into the gateway. The defenders held their ground, throwing the coral creatures back. Sunny lingered at the edge of the dais, watching the crowd of humans. One after another, they were disappearing into the beautiful radiance of the gateway, while the others continued to confidently repel the assault of the golems. They were going to survive. That meant that his job here was done. And just as he had expected, Castor was nowhere to be seen. Lingering for a few short moments, Sunny glanced at the gateway one last time and then stepped away. As he moved through the crowd of humans and approached its edge, someone suddenly called out his name. Turning his head, Sunny saw Effie. The huntress was carrying the unconscious body of Kai on one shoulder and keeping Cassie close to her own under another. The blind girl's face was ashen, confused, and empty. Effie called, "Doofus, where are you going?" Sunny stared at her for a few moments and then suddenly smiled. Sunny said, "There's just some unfinished business I need to deal with. Take care, you three. I will. See you later, I hope." With that, he took a step back and disappeared into the shadows. Summoning the dark wing and the prowling thorns, Sunny jumped off the edge of the stone balcony. In the next second, his dagger pierced the darkness and bit into a fractured coral branch high above. With a sharp pull, Sunny sent himself flying upward, the transparent cloak turning into a blur behind his back. All around him, the interior of the Crimson Spire that remained unchanged for thousands of years was shifting. The ancient tower continued to shudder and quake as it endured the calamitous consequences of the battle between changing star and the vessel of the artificial sun. Vast coral roots were shattering and plunging down, drowning the echoing expanse of the spire with deafening clangor. As massive slabs of coral collided against lower branches, they were pulverized in turn. Moving through all this destruction, Sunny struggled to stay alive. Before he could even reach the root he had been aiming for, it was obliterated by falling debris. The mass of coral then rained down, threatening to bury Sunny under its deadly weight. Not fazed, he twisted and hurled the prowling thorn sideways, then flew out of the way of the collapsing coral. Just a second later, Sunny hit the side of an intact root and pushed himself off its surface, continuing to ascend. He spun and twisted, using the prowling thorn and every surface he could reach to dodge the falling slabs of coral. Avoid being cut to pieces by deadly clouds of flying splinters and soar higher and higher. As he did, the shadow jumped from one root to another, searching for Castor. The legacy was much faster than Sunny, but was chained to the ground and didn't have the advantage of being able to see in the dark. Sunny was certain that he would be able to catch up to him before too long. And after a few torturous minutes, he inevitably did, emerging from a cloud of coral dust. Sunny left a crimson trail in the air as he landed on a wide root in a nimble roll. A moment later, he jumped to his feet and stood silently in the darkness, waiting for Castor to appear. Up here, at the highest levels of the spire, the chaos was not as pronounced. Those branches of coral that were going to break had already fallen, and the few remaining ones were relatively stable. That allowed Sunny to predict which route the legacy was going to take. The cool, polished wood of the weaver's mask rested comfortably on his face, hiding his features. Sunny wasn't sure what resources and connections the Han Li clan possessed, so he chose to be extra careful. He was wary of someone tracing Castor's death back to him with the help of a prophetic aspect ability or some strange and powerful memory. A vengeful legacy clan was the last thing he would want to deal with after returning to the real world. And by now, he was sure that one of the two of them was going to die here in this cursed and dreadful tower. This confrontation was long overdue. He was also wary of Castor himself. The proud scion was many things, but a fool was not one of them. There was a chance that he had long guessed Sunny's flaw. The mask was his insurance against that eventuality. Sunny murmured, "Let's see which one of us is better. Let's see which one of us deserves it more." For Sunny, this fight was not only about defeating Castor. It wasn't even about defending Neff. It was about defeating the world itself. A lifetime ago, when he and Castor had first met in the academy, they were on the opposite sides of humanity. One was on the top and the other was on the bottom. One was strong and surrounded by a circle of admirers, and the other one was weak and alone. One had the best education, the best mentors, the vast resources of his powerful family, the inherited arsenal of memories and plenty of soul shards to propel him forward to future success. The other had nothing. Sunny had always had nothing. No family and no home, no place to call his own, no one to care about whether he lived or died, no opportunity, no chance, no future. Thrust into the same hell as Castor, he clawed and fought, suffered and endured, survived and bettered himself through will, intellect, and countless brushes with death. And now, a year later, he was ready to claim his rightful place. By defeating Castor, he was going to prove once and for all that he wasn't lesser than anyone, that he wasn't some inconsequential nobody to be discarded and forgot, to be lost on the pages of history. that he mattered as much as those real humans did, that he was as exceptional as the best of them, despite the fact that he wasn't born into wealth and prosperity. Much more so, even, as Sunny waited in the darkness. A light of a memory lantern swiftly approached from below. Castor was rushing to the pinnacle of the spire, using his incredible speed, and training to avoid being killed by the falling debris. He was already getting close when, suddenly, the light of his lantern fell on a motionless figure that stood in the center of a wide coral route, barring his way. Dark armor weaved out of soft fabric with lusterless black leather protecting vital spots. An austere blade held lightly, its tip turned to the ground. The wooden mask that resembled the face of a fearsome demon was new, but still, he had no problem recognizing who was in front of him. Slowing down and stopping a few meters away from the hateful little vagrant, Castor gritted his teeth and spat.
It's you.
Hidden behind the mask, Sunny smiled. Sunny replied, No, you are mistaken. Actually, it's not me. Then, tilting his head, he stared at the proud legacy and said, his voice full of surprise. Sunny called, Oh, hey, Castor. What a coincidence to run into you here of all places. So unexpected. Ah, it must be fate. Castor remained silent for a while, then calmly looked up at the furiously pulsating radiance of the Crimson Terror's light. Finally, he lowered his head and exhaled through gritted teeth. Castor demanded, Out of my way, Sunny. Sunny blinked a couple of times, then said in a humorless tone, Sunny asked, Or what? The legacy grimaced and stared at him darkly, his face full of resentment. Castor retorted, I am so tired of you and your insolence. Why must you always ruin everything? Why can't you just know your place? Summoning his beautiful giant, Castor shook his head and said, Castor warned, Stay out of this if you value your life. This is the last chance I am going to give you. Sunny did not move, watching the young man silently. There was nothing but darkness in the eyes of the disturbing black mask. A few moments later, his voice resounded from behind it, strangely hollow. Sunny asked, Know my place. What is my place in your eyes? Castor. The legacy smiled slightly and then said naturally, as though stating a fact. Castor replied, Out of the sight of those better than you with the rest of the mongrels. What else? Sunny shifted slightly. When he spoke, his tone was unexpectedly carefree and friendly. Sunny ventured, Not exactly what I expected to hear. Well, never mind. Before we do this, though, can I ask you one question? Castor snarled. Castor spat, Sure, go ahead. This was something that had been pressing on Sunny's mind for a long time. Sunny asked, Why do you even want to kill Nephi's? What is so important that you are even willing to risk your life? The legacy looked at him with no humor in his eyes. After a few moments, he said in a strange tone,
This is not something that you scum will ever understand. Survival is all you creatures care about. Duty, loyalty, honor, those are the words the likes of you know nothing about. So I will put it in a way that will be easy even for you to comprehend.
He pierced him with an intense gaze and said, each word falling like an avalanche.
The immortal flame must be destroyed.
And then, his voice ringing with profound inevitability, Castor added, Castor declared, This is the will of the sovereigns. Sunny stared at him for a bit, engrossed in the solemn atmosphere of this proclamation. A few seconds later, in a sincerely confused tone, Sunny asked, Who? Castor's eyes widened. He looked at Sunny with a dumbfounded expression, then shook his head in disbelief. Castor stammered, Wait, you really don't know? She didn't tell you anything. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Sunny replied, Of course she did. Actually, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been told everything. No one knows more than me on this topic, really. The legacy stared at him for a few moments, then suddenly threw his head back and laughed out loud.
Pathetic mongrel, you don't even know who you serve. You don't even know who rules the world you live in. Why am I even wasting my breath talking to a worm like you?"
Sunny tilted his head, then said in a reproachful tone. Sunny remarked, "Ouch, that stings." Castor smiled darkly, then raised his sword. Castor snarled, "Enough of this. I'm done trying to reason with you, fool. I have allowed you to skulk in the shadows playing your vulgar games for long enough. I only permitted you to live because there was no reason to get rid of you. What do you think that you can defeat me? That your little schemes and secrets will give you a chance against a true legacy? Sorry to disappoint, but I figured them out a long time ago." Sunny remained silent for a bit and then asked in an indifferent tone. Sunny asked, "Oh yeah, do tell. What are my secrets exactly?" The legacy grinned. Castor declared, "You hide your strength and pretend to be weak. You go around telling ridiculous tales, making everyone think that you are a lunatic. At first, I thought that you have lost your mind too, but once I started paying attention, it was so obvious. The constant misdirections, the obnoxious bragging that no sane person would ever believe of the crazy act. This is you flaw, isn't it?" As Sunny tensed, Castor smiled triumphantly and said, Castor added, "You are compelled to lie against your will. Did you really think that no one would see the pattern? You even bribed that idle friend of yours to try and mislead everyone. A pathetic attempt. Were you expecting that anyone would buy it?" Sunny stared at him for a few moments and then exploded with laughter. Sunny laughed. "Ah, crap, you got me? Yes, you are right. This is my flaw. What sane person would go around telling such outrageous lies?" Then he pierced Castor with a murderous gaze and said, Sunny added, "Sadly, it seems that I am at a disadvantage in that regard. It is such a shame that I have no idea what your flaw is, that I haven't figured it out a long time ago, too." Castor looked at him, a corner of his mouth turning downward. In the light of the memory lantern, he looked handsome and confident. Mature. There was a short beard on his face and a few gray hairs in his luscious mane. Hidden behind the mask, Sunny smiled. Sunny mused, "It is so sad that I don't know that your powerful, incredible, amazing aspect ability shortens your lifespan every time you use it, and that you reverse its effect on your body with a charm memory in the shape of a sandglass. Ah, if only I was more observant. Too bad I am not." The legacy stared at him with a dark expression, his face slowly turning pale. After a while, he uttered, Castor conceded, "It doesn't matter. After I fulfill my duty and return to the real world, the awakening will allow me to take back the years that had been stolen from me, while you, rat, will stay in this cursed place foe." Before he was done talking, a heavy triangular blade suddenly flew into his face. As a hint of outrage gleamed in Castor's eyes, he easily swatted the kunai away and turned into a blur, lunging at Sunny with astonishing speed. Invisible to a human eye, the string of the prowling thorn was wrapped around two coral outcroppings, drawn across the wide route right ahead of him, and the proud legacy was about to. A green light flashed through the air, and Sunny felt his wrist jerk back, the tension of the string suddenly gone. Sunny cursed, "CR." A fraction of a second later, Castor was upon him.
Fast and too fast.
Castor was moving with astonishing speed, his figure turning into a blur. His flaw was a cruel one, but the power of the aspect ability he possessed was also incredible. In fact, Sunny had never met anyone with an ability as powerful as this, with the exception of himself and Nephis. Even the greatest warriors on the Forgotten Shore would have had no chance against it. Gemma, Effie, Sation. All of them would have been easily killed by the deadly scion of the Han Li clan. Perhaps only Horus could have fought him to a draw, but even then, Sunny wasn't sure. Not only did Castor possess a terrifying ability, but he was also one of the most skilled swordsmen of their generation. He also had a whole arsenal of memories hidden away inside his soul. Surely, he had a way to fight while blinded. That's why Sunny did not waste any time trying to destroy the memory lantern illuminating their surroundings. Instead, he just trusted his sword and met Castor's attack with his own. Two swords collided in the air, and in the next moment, Castor flew past Sunny and slowed down, eventually coming to a stop. A drop of blood fell off the tip of his giant. Sonny staggered. Sonny cursed, "Curse you." The sleeve of the puppeteer's shroud was torn and there was a shallow cut on his shoulder. He had managed to deflect the strike aimed at his heart, but wasn't fast enough to avoid being wounded after all. On Castor's face, there was a dark expression. Looking at Sonny, who was still alive, he grimaced and spat. Castor remarked, "Not bad. This is going to be entertaining, at least." Hidden behind the mask, Sonny grinned. Sonny replied, "Oh, yeah. I'm having a lot of fun myself, thanks." Of course, that was a lie. Back in the academy, Castor had been the only person to defeat Nephi's. Granted, all of them had been much weaker back then. Neph also had not used her aspect ability, while Sonny was using his to augment himself right now. Because of it, the gap in speed between the two of them was not completely lethal, and yet he was incomparably slower. In terms of pure physical ability, Sonny had no hope of surviving this duel. But he already knew the secret of how one had to fight against Castor. He had learned it from Changing Star herself during that short and fateful spar. A year ago, Nephi's had been in a similar situation and yet almost defeated her swift enemy. She had anticipated Castor's moves instead of reacting to them, and due to that, his speed advantage had been made less severe. This was what Sonny had to do now. Of course, to achieve such a feat, one had to possess an intricate understanding of the underlying laws of combat and a true mastery of both their mind and their body. Luckily, Sonny was one such man. He had obtained clarity a long time ago and spent every waking hour sharpening his skill and instincts. His mind had entered into the state of flow, making his perception stark and all-encompassing his thoughts quicker. His intuition was enhanced by the knowledge of the essence of battle. That gave him a chance to win. A moment later, Castor attacked again, and Sonny jerked the midnight shard sideways, blocking the ghostly green giant at the last possible moment. Sonny hissed, "Up." He had begun to chain the next move even before the two blades collided. A split second later, the legacy brought down his sword in a downward slash, aiming at Sonny's head. However, it was deflected. Sonny muttered, "Thrust at the neck." Once again, sliding down the length of the takai and biting Sonny in the shoulder. This time, the leather pauldron of his armor held, but just barely. Almost instantly, Castor pulled the giant back and then immediately thrust it forward, aiming to cut the enemy's throat. The midnight shard awkwardly pushed the gleaming blade away, but not fast enough. Another shallow cut appeared on Sonny's neck, seeping with blood. Sonny cursed, "Damn it." Infuriated, Sonny tried to counterattack, but was forced to concentrate on nothing but defense. Dozens of strikes rained on him in a span of a couple of seconds, filling the echoing expanse of the Crimson Spire with the clangor of steel. More and more cuts appeared on his body. None of them were too deep or dangerous, but that didn't make them less painful. No matter how cunning and perfect Sonny's movements were, he couldn't make up for his lack of speed completely. Months of training. Hundreds of battles, countless hours spent gaining insight into the inner workings of swordsmanship. Castor had done all of that too, and then some, and he was so much faster, but somehow Sonny was still alive. Not only was he alive, he wasn't even seriously injured. Yet, at some point, he feinted a block and dodged the blade of Castor's sword instead, then whipped his empty head forward as though trying to punch the legacy in the head. At the last moment, however, a ghostly stiletto appeared in his hand, only to be thrown aside by a powerful hit of the giant. Sonny barely managed to save his arm from being severed at the wrist. Sparing him a contemptuous glance, Castor snarled, "Cretin, have you forgotten that I was there when Changing Star gave you that memory?" Sonny gritted his teeth and lashed out with the austere takai, buying himself a moment to regroup. Sonny shot back, "I guess it slipped my mind." With that, he suddenly hurled the moonlight shard at the legacy, then followed it with a fearsome thrust of his sword. Castor easily dodged the stiletto, deflected the takai, and kicked him in the stomach, sending Sonny staggering back with a pained moan. For a fraction of a second, he was wide open. His enemy did not miss that opportunity, turning into a blur as he lunged forward. The gleaming giant flashed through the air, and at the same time, Sonny suddenly spun and twisted his body. The two of them almost brushed against earth other as Castor flew by. A moment later, Sunny shuddered and bent over, blood streaming from a deep wound on his side. The legacy turned around and smiled cruelly, a hint of satisfaction reflecting in his eyes. Castor sneered, "Not so boisterous now, are you, worm?" Sunny groaned and slowly straightened his back, pressing one hand against his bleeding side. His voice sounded strained and solemn. Sunny conceded, "Ah, yes, that didn't go exactly as planned." Then he titled his head and raised his other hand, staring at the object dangling from a torn chain that was gripped in it. Suddenly, Castor's hand shot toward his neck. Castor breathed, "You." Sunny grinned and dangled the sandglass charm in the air. Sunny taunted, "Wait, wow, how did this thing get here?" Castor's gritted his teeth, and the stolen memory immediately began to radiate a subtle white glow. He was trying to dismiss the charm and return it to his soul core. Before that happened, however, Sunny caught it and clenched his fist, ruthlessly shattering the crystal hourglass into tiny pieces. Castor's eyes widened. Castor roared, "Bastard!" As his shout resounded in the darkness, the shards of the precious memory flew to the ground, turning into sparks of light and disappearing as they fell. For a few seconds, both of them stood without motion. On Castor's face, shock and disbelief were mixed with fury, indignation, and fear. Slowly, he raised his head and pierced Sunny with a hateful gaze. Castor hissed, "You scum!" His voice was trembling with suppressed rage. Sunny muttered, "Good, rage is good. Anything that makes him lose control is G." In the next moment, Sunny got hit in the chest and flew back with a pained scream. Although he somehow managed to deflect the tip of the enchanted giant, the legacy still ended up slamming into him like a speeding train. The blade of his sword pierced the puppeteer's shroud once again, slicing Sunny's forearm. Sunny cursed, "God damn it. This was just unfair." The shroud was a Tier 5 memory of the awakened rank. Where did the bastard find a weapon that could cut through it so easily? Well, Sunny more or less knew where. Who was to say that the ghostly green giant wasn't of the same tier, if not higher? Legacy clans had a lot of powerful memories in their treasuries. Unlike him, hitting the ground in a roll, Sunny dashed to the side and used the pommel of the midnight shard to slam Castor's hand away. He barely saved himself from being decapitated. Shaken, Sunny threw a handful of coral dust into the air and retreated. A moment later, his enemy emerged from the dust like a vengeful demon. The damned giant was once again aimed at his heart. But Castor looked different. It seemed that Sunny was right on the money with his guess about the proud science flaw and the purpose of the mysterious charm memory. Before, Castor had already looked slightly older than the other members of the cohort, which was strange considering that both Effie and Kai were supposed to be the oldest among them. This was what had initially caught Sunny's attention, because back at the academy, there had been no such difference. However, now that the crystal sandglass was broken, time seemed to be catching up with the legacy. If anyone were to see him now, they would have assumed that he was in his late 20s, perhaps even early 30s. He still resembled the youth that Sunny had met just a year ago, but just barely. Instead, a handsome, mature, powerful man was attacking him, his dark skin still smooth, but already showing the signs of future wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and mouth. There were several silver hairs in his beard, straining every muscle in his body. Sunny stood his ground and parried the deadly thrust, then dodged to the left. Once again, he was a fraction of a second late, and another cut appeared on his body. Sunny cursed, "Curses." With a pained grimace, Sunny dodged, evaded, parried, and blocked, continuing to retreat and create distance between himself and Castor. At some point, a furious roar made his ears ring. Castor roared, "Get back here, you rat! Why are you running like a coward?" Hidden behind the mask and struggling to breathe, Sunny gritted his teeth and hissed. Sunny hissed, "No reason in particular." The next time he and Castor clashed, the legacy appeared to be in his late 30s. Now, he resembled a man in his prime. His powerful physique became even more formidable, his broad shoulders straining the metal of the sturdy scale armor. His temples were gray and his beard had silver streaks running through it. He looked like the kind of older man young girls would be utterly smitten by. Sonny groaned as he felt another laceration appear on his body, pushed Castor away, then dashed back. The midnight shard flew from one side to another, from low to high, not stopping even for a split second. The ringing of steel fused into a continuous, deafening clamor. He felt as though his lungs were on fire but couldn't allow himself to slow down ever for a moment. A momentary lapse was going to cost him his life. Sonny gasped, "Come on, this is not much worse than facing against Saint." But it was worse, so much worse. Even while augmented by the shadow, Sonny couldn't resist Castor's furious onslaught. He was stronger and much more resilient, but that was the thing about sharp weapons. They were created to make the amount of force required to kill someone much less demanding. A skilled swordsman that relied on speed could dispatch of an enemy with one well-aimed touch of the blade. To someone like Sonny, Castor was a nightmare, if not for the blood weave. He would have grown weak and slow from blood loss a long time ago, just from the numerous cuts on his body. And yet, he resisted and continued to retreat, desperately deflecting one lightning-fast strike after another. The next time Sonny got a good look at the proud legacy, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Attacking him was an old man. His gaunt face was laced with a spiderweb of wrinkles, and his hair and beard were completely gray. There was almost no sign left of the handsome youth he had known and despised for so long. Castor was still full of power and vigor, though. His fury was still as murderous and scathing as it had been before. His speed, however, was just a tiny bit slower. Castor roared, "Die, mongrel!" With a furious roar, Castor brought down the ghostly giant down on Sonny, who was still reeling from the previous blow. Desperate, Sonny raised his takai into an awkward semblance of a block. When their swords collided, the midnight shard flew aside and almost slid from his hands. What's worse, Sonny lost his balance and fell backward, landing on the ground in a heap. As a cruel smile appeared on the old man's weathered face, he lunged forward to finish the defenseless enemy. But at the last second, a calm voice resounded from behind his back, the voice he hated but knew so well. Standing somewhere behind him, Nephi's ordered in a tone that denied refusal. Nephi's commanded, "Back." Castor's eyes widened. With an expression of utter terror, he spun around and raised his sword, ready to finally face the person he had dreaded and wanted to kill for so long. However, when he did, he saw nothing but emptiness. There was no one behind him, just a simple rock laying on the ground. As Castor watched in confusion, his thoughts slowed due to the debilitating effect of age. The rock shouted in Nephi's voice, "Hide in the shadows." Almost immediately, the proud scion's pupils narrowed. With a dark grimace, he spun back, moving his sword into a defensive position. He was just a fraction of a second late. Without making any sound, the tip of the midnight shard pierced his scale armor, his flesh. And then his heart. Staring at the stunned face of the feeble old man in front of him, Sonny scowled and sighed. Castor looked down at the blade protruding from his chest and the blood streaming from beneath, then weakly grabbed the takai with his hand. A pained, resentful grimace contorted his pale, wrinkled face. Straining to raise his head, he looked Sonny in the eyes and whispered. Castor whispered, You have no honor." Sonny stared at the dying old man with pity, then looked away. Sonny said, "There is honor indeed. Honor is not just a word powerful scumbags invented to make young fools like you die for them and kill for them. It's not a chain that they wrapped around your neck to make you a slave." Castor looked at him for a few moments, trying to say something, but then slowly fell to his knees. In the sudden silence, the voice of the spell whispered,
"You have slain a dormant human, Hanli Castor. Your shadow grows stronger."
Standing above Castor's corpse, Sonny tilted his head slightly. Despite his expectations, there was not a lot of joy in his heart. Instead, defeating the powerful scion of a true legacy clan left him feeling somber and a little bitter. There was, however, a sense of, if not validation, then at least vindication. It was as though some profound need in his soul was finally satisfied, making it more solid, steady. With a pained groan, Sonny took a step back, turned around, and dismissed the weaver's mask. He was in better shape than he had expected to be. Countless cuts on his body were painful but not dangerous. Blood weave was diligently doing its job, preventing him from losing too much of the precious red liquid. The cuts were already starting to scab over and close. The only serious wound was the gash on his side, but it too had already stopped bleeding. Very soon it was going to start healing too. Until then. It was not going to hinder his movements a lot, as long as Sunny was ready to endure a bit of suffering. After a year on the Forgotten Shore, dealing with pain was one of his best trained skills. I've been through worse, much worse. This is nothing. Then another thought entered his mind. Sunny mused, that shadow fragment. It should have brought me to 1,000 right. A moment later, he realized that his whole being was somehow weird. It felt as though there was intense heat in his chest, slowly growing more and more scalding. This sensation was not exactly physical, but more of a spiritual one. Like the core of his soul was undergoing a violent change. With a mix of anticipation and dread, Sunny concentrated on this feeling. Sunny breathed, "Here we go." What was going to happen to him? Suddenly, he heard the voice of the spell again. In the eerie expanse of the Crimson Spire, where ancient darkness fused with otherworldly light, it sounded solemn and almost triumphant.
Your shadow is overflowing with power.
Sunny listened tensely, trying to guess what was it going to say next.
Your shadow is taking shape.
In the next moment, he staggered and fell to his knees. His eyes widened and lost focus. The heat that was building up in Sunny's soul had reached a critical point and then exploded. It felt as though his core was being torn apart, drowning him with intense, indescribable pain. Disoriented and frightened, he tried to scream, but no sound came out of his mouth. Something was emerging from within his soul, ripping it into shreds. Sunny knew that he couldn't stop that process, and so all he could do was endure. As Sunny convulsed on the ground, the spell whispered,
Your shadow is complete.
And then something strange happened. The spell was about to say something else, but then the entire Crimson Spire suddenly shuddered. This quake was much stronger than all the previous ones, making it feel as though the gargantuan structure was about to topple. Sunny heard the deafening sound of breaking stone. Almost at the same time, he was suddenly enveloped in absolute darkness, all light disappearing from the echoing interior of the ancient tower, and the spell abruptly fell quiet. Its last proclamation left unsaid. The pain tearing his soul apart was also gone. It didn't feel as though the process was finished, though. It felt as though it was interrupted. Sunny stammered, what is happening?" Confused and disoriented, Sunny looked around. Why was it so dark? Following a premonition, he then raised his head and glanced up. What? The furious light of the Crimson Terror was gone. As Sunny tried to wrap his head around this fact, two things registered in his mind. The first one was that he felt very strange. His chest was still full of ethereal heat, but there was also something else, some kind of interference. He was having trouble finding words to describe that sensation, but knew that it wasn't harmful, at least not immediately. The second one was that Sunny cursed, crap. The second thing he noticed was that, currently, there were giant slabs of stone plunging down on his head. Picking himself up from the ground, Sunny dashed to the edge of the wide route and jumped off of it. Just a second later, one of the slabs crushed into the coral, turning it into dust. A violent shockwave hit him in the back. The prowling thorn was currently restoring itself in the Soul Sea, its invisible string cut by Castor's enchanted giant, so for a moment. Sunny found himself in free fall. Then, the transparent blur of the dark wing finally weaved itself from sparks of light on his back and allowed him to glide forward, following the momentum of the jump. As he reached the wall of the spire, another deafening crash resounded from behind. Looking up, and at the descending mass of broken stone, Sunny thrust the moonlight shard forward. The tip of the fallen memory easily sunk into the ancient granite, giving him purchase, hanging on it. He pressed himself against the cold stones and gritted his teeth, waiting for the avalanche of debris to pass and praying that nothing hits him. A few moments later, the spire shuddered again and then grew still. Somewhere down below, destruction was still raining on the interior of the spire, but this high, it was relatively quiet. Sunny opened his eyes. he was still alive. The dome of the Crimson Spire seemed to be broken, letting in beautiful sunshine. The darkness was not as impenetrable now. Suffused with that light, dust particles floated in the air, sparkling like tiny diamonds. Sunlight, sunlight. Panicking, Sunny looked around, searching for shelter, but then noticed that his shadow was utterly calm. Unlike before, when his soul was being destroyed by the artificial sun, it wasn't doing anything. It did seem a bit confused, though. Sunny demanded, "What the hell is going on?" Perplexed, Sunny decided to make absolutely sure that the annihilating power of the terror was gone from the rays of sunshine and dove into the soul sea. What he saw there shocked him so much that he almost let go of the hilt of the moonlight shard and fell down. The entire landscape of the tranquil sea was changed. If before there was nothing but darkness, now it was filled with blinding white light. The light flowed through Sunny's soul, making the silent waters ripple and swirl. Up above, the black sphere of the shadow core was burning with furious flames. It trembled and seethed as though overflowing with power. However, that power was being suppressed by the current of light, which prevented it from spreading outward. Beneath it, there was a massive whirlpool. Stunned, Sunny stared at the unrecognizable expanse of his soul and didn't know how to react. Sunny demanded, "What the hell is this?" Full of unease and dark thoughts, he hesitated for a bit and then summoned the runes. Everything was the same as the last time he had glanced at them, except for one line. Shadow fragments, 1000. Not everything. In the cluster of runes describing his attributes, a few new ones appeared. Concentrating on them, Sunny held his breath and read. Attribute Soul Conduit. Soul Conduit. The attribute had no description, nor was its acquisition announced by the spell. Staring at the runes for a few more seconds, Sunny cast one last glance at the white void of his soul sea and left it. He had no answers for this mysterious sequence of events, but his intuition was ringing the alarm bell. He was almost sure that the strange and painful process that began after he had absorbed the last shadow fragment was somehow interrupted. The white light permeating the soul sea felt unnatural and wrong, like something external to it rather than natural. The mysterious new attribute was most likely connected to this external influence instead of to the saturation of the shadow core. In fact, Soul Conduit was most likely the manifestation of the radiant force that was currently suppressing the core. In that sense, this attribute was more akin to the mind hex of the soul devourer than to the blood weave. It wasn't something that Sunny had achieved or acquired. It was forced upon him for reasons yet unknown. Gritting his teeth, Sunny shifted and changed his grip on the handle of the moonlight shard. Then he summoned the ordinary rock and immediately dismissed it. Finally, he ordered the shadow to wrap itself around his body, then shift to the ghostly stiletto and back. At least the new attribute did not seem to be directly harmful. Sunny was still in control of his body and mind. As well as having full access to his memories and shadow control, all it seemed to be affecting was the shadow core itself, preventing it from achieving whatever it was that had failed to happen, at least for now. But how long would that safety last? Raising his head, Sunny stared at the pinnacle of the Crimson Spire. Something unexplainable had transpired there, causing this strange turn of events. Why was he trying to guess if all the answers were most likely waiting for him up above? To his side, a massive slab of stone had lodged itself between stumps of broken coral roots, more debris piled on top of it at steep angles, forming a twisting path to the distant sunlight. Pushing himself off the wall of the tower, Sunny glided forward and landed on the inclined stone surface. Then he lingered for a few moments and began climbing up. The higher he ascended, the more sunshine surrounded him. Eventually, the whole tower was filled with nothing but stark beams of light and deep, dark shadows. The world was black and white, as though no other color was allowed into this solemn space. After a while, Sunny approached the broken dome of the Crimson Spire. There, a vast hall was hidden in the darkness, both its floor and roof now shattered, letting in the brightness of the sun. With a deep sigh, Sunny reached with his hands and pulled himself into the hall. He was now at the very pinnacle of the Crimson Spire. in the lair of the terror of the forgotten shore. At the very tip of the ancient tower, there was once a vast and beautiful chamber. It seemed as though it had a large circular opening in its center, allowing sunlight to easily flow into the gargantuan structure at high noon. Then, however, that opening had become overgrown by crimson coral, and now it was gone. Due to something that had happened during Changing Star's battle against the Terror, the floor of the chamber partially collapsed, bringing the coral down with it. The ceiling was damaged too, although to a lesser extent. Through the chasm in the spire's roof, Sunny could see the boundless white skies and the burning orb of the artificial sun. Lingering at it for a moment, he then lowered his gaze and looked at the chamber itself. The first thing he saw was Nephi's, who was sitting on the floor, staring into the distance. Although her state was not as terrifying as on that terrible night when a dweller of the depths had pulled her beneath the waves of the cursed sea, she did not look too good. The Starlight Legion armor was practically destroyed, revealing gruesome burns and cuts on her ivory skin. Just like then, white flames were seeping out of them instead of blood. These fires seemed strangely weak, though, as though on the verge of being extinguished. They were also failing to mend her mangled flesh. Neff's wounds appeared to be healing, but at a very slow pace. A far cry from the miraculous restoration that Sunny had witnessed so many times in the past. The furious power that had always burned deep within her soul seemed to be finally exhausted. Almost. Following her gaze, Sunny shuddered when he saw the Terror. The creature that had created the forgotten shore might have looked as a human once, but now it was like a feverish nightmare. For some reason, Sunny had expected to see the familiar shape of the nameless goddess, whose statue was created in the likeness of the girl that had been made into the vessel of the artificial sun. What met him instead was a giant creature whose body was made out of a perverse fusion of crimson coral and mutilated human flesh. In a sense, it was similar to the crimson golems he had fought at the base of the spire. It was a twisted approximation of a living being, one that radiated a horrifying sense of madness, wrongness, and loss. Instead of a human face, the Terror had hundreds of them, all contorted in expressions of blind agony and suffering. Their mouths were open, as though straining to scream. Their eyes were empty wells of pure darkness. At least now they were. When the Terror was alive, they must have shone with blinding, annihilating light, and it was unmistakably dead. The harrowing creature was sprawled on the floor, its limbs unmoving, its body fractured almost in half. The edges of the terrible wound were burned and melted, leaving no doubt that it was dealt by Changing Star's incandescent silver blade. Sunny breathed. How? How is this possible? Stunned, Sunny stared at the vanquished Terror, failing to comprehend what he saw. How could Neff kill a fallen Terror? No matter how powerful she was still a sleeper. Even with the tremendous augmentation of the Dawn Shard, she should not have been capable of slaying something this powerful. Something was very wrong here, Sunny muttered. This doesn't make sense. But then again, this wouldn't be the first Terror Nephi's had slain. Changing Star had killed one in her first nightmare too, earning her that name. Still, there was a vast difference between a dormant human killing an awakened Terror and a fallen one. One feat was impossible. The other was simply unthinkable. Turning to her, Sunny hesitated and then said in disbelief. Sunny breathed, You actually killed it. Neff flinched as though noticing his presence for the first time. Then she slowly turned her head and looked at him with empty, lost eyes. Only after a few seconds, a hint of recognition appeared in them. She remained silent for a while and then said in a hollow voice, Nephi said, Sunny, you are finally here. He hesitated for a few moments, not sure how to answer. As seconds passed by, the silence between them grew tense, full of untold meaning. Finally, Nephi's blinked and looked away, staring at the corpse of the Crimson Terror, her sword hand trembling slightly. Nephi's whispered, Killed it. Yes, I did. Got lucky, I guess. After a while, she added in a quiet voice. Nephi's added, It was just a fake star in the end. Sunny smiled slightly, but his eyes remained cold. Sunny replied, Lucky. I know a thing or two about being lucky, Neff. A creature like this would not have died just because of bad luck. She remained silent for a bit, then sighed and looked down. Nephi's explained. It was evolving, trying to become a titan. The burden of transformation made it vulnerable. I just happened to attack while the terror was at its weakest. That's why it died.
Evolving into a titan.
Noticing a surprised expression on his face, Changing Star grimaced and pointed to the artificial sun. Nephi's asked, "Have you not thought about what we have done?" Sunny looked up at the radiant sphere of light and frowned. In all the chaos, he had indeed forgotten to consider the full scale of what had transpired after the battle, as well as the reasons for and consequences of it. Come to think of it, why would the light of the artificial sun destroy the souls of every living creature it touched? It had not been like this before the fall of the ancient civilization for many generations at least. But then, the vessel had become corrupted and turned into a nightmare creature, the Terror. And at the same time, the seals imprisoning the curse of the all-consuming darkness had been destroyed, letting it free. So, in fact, the corrupted sun had never existed without the dark sea keeping it company. Until today, Sunny had always thought that the sun was restraining the dark sea. Could it be that it had always been restrained by the darkness as well? And when he banished the ancient curse and locked it underground, the sun was finally liberated from its shackles. That's why its light suddenly changed, turning into the annihilating white radiance. It had become free to do whatever it wanted, but there was something else. As his eyes widened, Nephi's nodded.
Yes, the artificial sun does not just illuminate the vicinity of the Crimson Spire. It illuminates the whole of the Forgotten Shore. Its light reaches everywhere. So, as we were fighting our way through the tower, most of the living creatures on the Forgotten Shore had been wiped out. All that death, all those countless souls, guided into the spire by the labyrinth, like a colossal hecatomb to fuel the evolution of the Crimson Terror.
And Nephi's just happened to attack while the Terror was in the throes of that terrifying transformation. Well, that wasn't a coincidence, most likely. Sunny had not forgotten the thoughtful look on her face as Neph had peered out of the gates of the spire before giving the Dreamer army the command to advance. He shivered, only now realizing that this whole region of the Dream Realm was now almost completely empty of life. Only a few nightmare creatures must have survived. Those who were lucky enough to hide from the deadly sunlight in time, or were powerful enough to resist it. Such a boundless influx of souls would indeed be enough to push the Crimson Terror to the next step of its evolution. Devolution. Whatever it was that happened to nightmare creatures as they grew more powerful. Not that Sunny knew anything about this matters, but if anything could cause something like that, then the evisceration of an entire region of the Dream Realm would certainly do the trick. Now, however, the Terror was dead, and its corrupting influence was gone, turning the artificial sun back to its normal self. It couldn't be that easy, though. As though answering his thoughts, the spire shuddered again. Another slab of stone broke off from the floor of the chamber and plunged down. Suddenly, the light of the sun grew a little bit dimmer. Looking up, Sunny noticed that the artificial sun looked not as bright as it had just a few minutes ago. It was as though it was slowly dying. Was it dying? There was no vessel to channel soul essence into its furnace anymore, after all. Interrupting his thoughts, Nephi's suddenly spoke. Her voice hoarse and tired, Nephi's asked, "What happened to the others?" Sunny shifted and looked down through the chasm in the chamber's floor. Far below, he could see the vast balcony and the shimmering ring of the gateway on it. Somehow, its shine seemed weaker. The balcony, however, was empty. There were no humans there, and even the coral golems lay unmoving, their semblance of life snuffed out when the Terror died. Sunny replied, "Everyone has escaped." Neph sighed slowly as though with relief. After a long pause, she moved slightly and asked, Nephi's asked, "What about Castor?" Sunny glanced at her and shrugged. When he spoke, his voice was cold and indifferent. Sunny said, "I killed him." Changing Star remained silent for a long time. Then she whispered, seemingly addressing no one. Nephi's whispered, "So that's why." Suddenly, a bitter laugh escaped from her lips. Nephi's raised her hands and pressed them against her face as though overwhelmed by some deep, dark emotion. After a few seconds, her muffled voice reached his ears. Nephi's said, "You shouldn't have killed him, Sonny." Sonny snarled. Sonny demanded, "Yeah, why exactly?" She remained motionless for a few seconds and then slowly lowered her hands and put them on her knees. Her face was pale and bleak. Nephi's asked, "Have you checked your attributes?" He nodded and looked at her with a curious expression. Sonny replied, "I did. There's a new one there, Soul Conduit." Changing Star stared into the distance and nodded. Nephi said, "Yeah, same for me." Sonny raised his eyebrow and asked, his voice calm and steady. Sonny asked, "Any idea what it means?" She did not say anything for a while and then turned her head to look at him. Nephi asked, "Have you not figured it out?" He shrugged. Sonny replied, "I was a bit preoccupied. Why? What is it?" Nephi sighed and looked at the walls of the chamber. Finally, she said,
This whole tower is a giant soul machine. It was created to collect soul essence and funnel it into the artificial sun. However, it can't function without one small but crucial gear. A human to serve as the fulcrum of all that power, the conduit for all those souls.
And then in a much quieter voice, she added, Nephi's whispered, "The vessel." Sonny shuddered, then stared at the corpse of the repulsive creature. The previous vessel of the artificial sun. Nephi's had killed it, destroying a crucial part of the spire's mechanism. And so the spire found it a replacement. The two of them. The only two humans left on the forgotten shore, conveniently hiding from the obliterating sun inside the ancient tower. One would be tempted to say that it was fate. Sonny asked, "What does it mean for us exactly? Are we going to turn into something like that thing?" Neph slowly shook her head. Nephi's replied, "Not yet. Not for a long time. The terror had absorbed most of the souls it had reaped after the battle, and there's no one to make sacrifices to the sun now. The labyrinth, too, is now dead." Echoing her words, the spire trembled once again, and somewhere down below, a deafening sound of crushing stone could be heard. Sonny tilted his head. Sonny asked, "So what's the problem? Can't we just get the hell out of here and never come back?" Changing Star looked at him, her eyes full of cold, bitter emotion. Nephi's asked, "You don't get it, do you?" After that, she gritted her teeth and said, Nephi's declared, "The Crimson Spire is a machine and the gateway is a part of that machine. The spire can't function without a human serving as the sole conduit. And neither can the gateway. There has to be a vessel inside the tower for the gateway to work." She slowly rose to her feet, swayed slightly, and finally pierced him with a dark gaze. Nephi's declared, "Which means that only one of us can escape." Sonny stared at her for a few seconds, then looked down at the distant ring of the gateway. Finally, he turned back to Nephi's and said, Sonny asked, "I don't suppose you'll stay behind and let me go?" Changing Star looked at him, her striking gray eyes full of intensity and nascent white flames. Nephi's replied, "I was about to ask you the same." Sonny lingered for a moment, then grinned. Sonny shot back, "Not a chance." Slowly walking away from the edge of the chasm, Sonny stopped opposite Nephi's and looked at her. In his dark eyes, there was nothing but coldness. Sonny said, "Well, it's not like we didn't know for a long time that this would be how things end. Did we?" She stared at him for a while, then smiled bitterly. Nephi's replied, "We did." Indeed, they knew. From that terrible day when Sonny had first understood the meaning behind Cassie's vision, he suspected that one day, in order to survive, he would have to kill Nephi's. This was the truth he had chosen to hide from, even if it meant losing his mind. The final and most unbearable reason for why he had spent months alone in the dark city, hunting monsters and slowly turning into one of them. How does one come to terms with the knowledge that, one day, they will have to kill the person they care for the most? Knowledge, indeed, was the heaviest thing in the world. Back at the beginning of it all, far away from the dark city, before they had even known that the Crimson Spire existed, Cassie had shared with them a terrible vision. She said,
At first, I saw a boundless darkness locked behind 7 seals,
Something vast was churning in the darkness. I felt like if I directly saw it, I would lose my mind. As I watched, terrified, the seals broke one after another until only one remained. And then that seal broke too.
The first part of her vision described the day when the vessel of the artificial sun had gone mad, and the curse of the all-consuming darkness had escaped the prison created for it by the 7 ancient heroes.
I saw the human castle again, only this time it was at night. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light, the castle was suddenly consumed by fire with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. I saw a corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, a woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monsters, an archer trying to pierce the falling sky with his arrows.
The lonely star shining in the black skies was Nephi's, the herald of ruinous change, who had drowned the halls of the bright castle in blood to become its ruler, and then watched as it burned to the ground. The corpse in the golden armor was Gunlog, who had died on his white throne, killed by her hand. The woman with a bronze spear and the desperate archer were Effie and Kai, who had almost perished fighting against the nightmare horde during the siege of the Crimson Spire.
In the end, I saw a colossal, terrifying Crimson Spire. At its base, 7 severed heads were guarding 7 locks, and at the top, a dying angel was being consumed by hungry shadows. When I saw the angel bleed, I suddenly felt as though something so precious that it can't be described with words was taken from me.
7 severed heads guarding 7 locks were the heads of the giant statues, who stared at the star sigil that Sunny had used to banish the dark sea. And the last part of the prophecy, it wasn't that hard to understand, too. Nephi's was the dying angel, the precious thing that was going to be taken from Cassie, and Sunny was the hungry shadow that consumed her. It was their fate.
Then I felt so much sorrow, pain, and rage that what little remained of my sanity seemed to disappear. That was when I woke up, I think.
This was the last thing Cassie had said. Looking at Nephi's, Sunny sighed and turned away. Sunny said, "I warned you, didn't I? I told you that this story won't have a happy ending, that there will be only sorrow, pain, and rage. Do you remember what you answered me?" These were the words he said on the day Neph had asked him to join her expedition. Back then, his suspicion that they would inevitably end up as enemies had already grown, becoming almost a certainty. Almost, that cursed word. This was the word that had given him hope, no matter how small, hope that he was wrong. But despite that hope, Sunny had been preparing for this moment for a long, long time. It was because he had known that he would have to face Nephi's in combat that he had decided to incorporate Saint's methodical style into his technique. Why he trained without rest, day and night, not sparing himself from the pain and hardship. If his only skill was one that she herself had taught him, what chance did he have of defeating her? It was for that reason that he had climbed to the highest point of the hunter's statue and spent a night alone there, steeling himself for the inevitable future, forcing himself to accept the terrible truth that, soon, he would have to kill Nephi's. It was because of this that he had refused Changing Star's offer to heal him. How could he allow her to endure the terrible pain of the white flames, knowing that she would be suffering for the sake of her future killer? And it was because of this that he had not tried to learn all of her secret plans, remaining comfortable in his role as a hired mercenary, an outsider. He had known that, no matter what, they would end up here in this moment, forced to fight each other. Fate was a terrifying enemy to fight against. He knew it better than most. Fate always won in the end. Defeating it was almost impossible. Shifting slightly, Nephi's looked at him and answered. Her voice strangely wistful, Nephi's replied, "Life is not a story. It only ends when you die." Sunny smiled. Sunny asked, "So, are you ready to die?" As white sparks ignited in the depths of Changing Star's eyes, she answered with another question. Nephi's asked, "What about you?" Instead of answering, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard and raised it, assuming a battle stance. Opposite of him, Nephi's did the same, her silver sword weaving itself from blinding light. Of course, neither of them planned to kill the other. They needed the other to remain alive, at least until the victor passed through the gateway. How long would the loser survive after that, though? Especially if they were beaten terribly enough to lose the ability to resist further. Staying behind meant death, as the ancient gargantuan tower quaked around them, balancing on the edge of collapse, lost from light and changing star prepared to cross their blades. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, the air practically crackling with tension at the point where their gazes met. The white flame seeping from changing star's wounds suddenly flashed in a furious outburst, closing some of her wounds and making others seem less severe. After that, however, it grew weak and disappeared, retreating back into the furnace of her soul. As a pained grimace contorted the young woman's face, a dim radiance then slowly shined from beneath her ivory skin. At the same time, the shadow flowed up and wrapped itself around Sunny's body, making it brim with power and vitality. He inhaled deeply and slightly moved, shifting his weight from one leg to another. Sunny whispered, "How can it end?" Before the thought could fully form, Sunny ruthlessly destroyed it and banished it from his mind. This was the last obstacle on his way back to the real world, and the most deadly. Sunny had fought many terrible creatures in the cursed hell of the Forgotten Shore, but none of them were as fearsome and dangerous as Changing Star. This was going to be his hardest battle yet. To win it, he had to be absolutely clear, absolutely focused. He couldn't allow himself to feel anything, be distracted by anything. No doubt, no fear, no regret, no compassion, only determination, only resolve, only murderous will to prevail, as dust particles shined in the beams of white light that fell through the broken roof of the ancient chamber, as stark shadows swelled with dark anticipation. Nephi's brought the pommel of her sword to her shoulder, white flames ignited in her eyes, and then suddenly she lunged forward. Sunny hissed, "Fast!" But not fast enough to not give Sunny enough time to react. Raising the midnight shard, he dashed forward to block her furious assault, and shuddered the force of the impact sending a shock through his entire body. It felt as though his sword had collided with a mountain. Their blades got entangled for a moment and then separated. Almost immediately, the silver longsword lashed out again, appearing from an unexpected direction. And then again, and again, and again. Sunny feverishly defended, chaining blocks and deflections into one uninterrupted sequence of swift moves. Despite his best efforts, he reeled slightly after each strike. It was as though he was being hit by a hurricane of adamantine sledgehammers, each hit making his bones tremble and groan. Sunny thought, How is she that strong? How was Nephi so strong? How was she so fast? How was she so resilient? It didn't make sense. By now, Sunny had fully saturated his core, bringing him to the pinnacle of what a human of his rank could achieve in terms of physical ability. His power was further doubled by the augmentation of the shadow, making him more akin to one of the awakened than to a mere sleeper. No dormant human should have been able to match his power in every regard. And yet, Changing Star did. More than that, she was more powerful than him, tremendously so. She was more like a nightmare creature than a human. Her movements were fast as lightning, her strength was terrifying, and her technique was flawless, leaving him no chance to exploit even the smallest of mistakes. No sleeper should have been that powerful. It was simply impossible. And yet, somehow it wasn't. Sunny muttered, "Impossible, impossible." Deflecting another blow, Sunny gritted his teeth and dashed to the side, hoping to exploit the momentary opening in his enemy's defense. However, he was met by the ruthless flash of the silver blade instead. The opening was just a ruse, one which almost cost him his hand. Something is very wrong here. Either the augmentation of the white flame was much more powerful than that of his shadow, or something else was at play. However, Sunny didn't think that the radiance emanating from Neff's skin was stronger than his own physical enhancement. From what he had observed during her battle against Gunlog, it was roughly the same or only slightly more forceful. It shouldn't have given her this big of an advantage, especially in its seemingly exhausted state. Somehow. Nephi's had grown much stronger between then and now, but how? At least the silver sword was not burning with the annihilating, incandescent light. If it was, the midnight shard might have already been, if not destroyed, then at least severely damaged. In that regard, luck was still on Sunny's side. They exchanged several more blows and disengaged for a fraction of a second, then closed in again. Changing Star's sword shot forward, missing Sunny's face by a few millimeters, or so he thought before sensing warm drops rolling down his cheek. A thin cut appeared on it, swelling with blood. Just a little bit to the right, and he would have lost an eye. Shaken, Sunny deflected the sword away, preventing Nephi's from slicing his neck with a reverse cut, and leaned forward in an attempt to ram her with his shoulder. Changing Star easily sidestepped around Sunny and brought her weapon down, forcing him to block from a disadvantageous position and stagger back. Sunny cursed, "Curse it." Their violent clash must have looked furious and morbidly beautiful. Both moved with incredible speed and possessed ferocious strength. Both were skilled and experienced, forged into formidable killers by hundreds of deadly battles. One was darkness and shadows, while the other was radiance and light. But the true combat was happening somewhere else, invisible to the naked eye. This fight was as much about strategy and insight as it was about physical prowess and technique. After all, to excel as a fighter, one had to master both their body and mind. Nephi's might have been unnaturally fast and strong, but what really made her devastatingly deadly was her own battle genius, her incredible level of understanding of the laws and principles of combat. Armed with it, she was able to predict what her enemy was going to do even before they themselves knew it. But that was not all. The scariest thing about Nephi's was that, through that understanding, she was even able to manipulate and dictate her opponent's actions, turning them into her puppet. She was in absolute control of the flow of combat. Combat was her domain, just like shadows were his. But Sunny was not a novice either. He was a master of manipulation too. But more importantly, he had enough insight and knew Nephi's well enough to, if not deceive her, then at least not allow her to lure him into an inescapable trap. That was why. For a dozen torturously long seconds, neither of them had been able to seriously wound the other. Even if Sunny was locked into desperate defense and outmatched in every regard, he still managed to hold Changing Star's monstrous onslaught off, at least for now. Finally, the two of them disengaged and stepped back, pausing for a few moments. Sunny was breathing heavily, his bloodied face turning even more pale than usual. Nephi stared at him with a grim expression, her own breathing laborious and pained. If this was a cliché drama at that point, they would have exchanged words expressing their resolve and determination, admiring their enemy or humiliating them with disparaging insults, showcasing their fearlessness by making a carefree joke. But it was not. Everything that could have been said had been said already. There was no way back. All that remained was violence. Looking at Nephi's, Sunny suppressed a devious smile. Something had changed about the proud daughter of the immortal Flame clan. Something that he had been waiting for from the start of their vicious battle. The wounds that had been partially closed by the white flame were beginning to seep blood again. And as they did, the blood blossom charm hanging on a thread tied around his neck finally rose from its slumber, filling the midnight shard with boundless hunger. Enhanced by the blood blossom, the austere Takai suddenly felt lighter in his hands, full of cold, frightening determination. It was almost as though it had a mind of its own now, a mind focused on one goal, to find the enemy and get a taste of their blood. Sunny breathed, finally. A moment later, Nephi's attacked again, her beautiful face cold and indifferent like an alabaster mask. Only the flames in her eyes moved, burning furiously, white as the empty void of the godless heavens above their heads. Sunny gritted his teeth and moved to meet her. Their blades clashed once again. Just like before, he was shaken by the force of the impact. Only now, he had managed to intercept her strike a fraction of a second faster. It was as though the midnight shard was ever so slightly pulling his hand, making it move with a bit more speed, aim a little better, withstand the pressure of the strikes with a subtly less strain. In the next few seconds, that change had become more apparent. Before, he had no chance to launch an offense. Changing Star was reveling in her flowing and unpredictable battle style, her every movement oppressive and unpredictable. This unpredictability alone made him wary of committing to an attack. Of course, Sunny was using the same style, but even though he had mastered it to an admirable degree, his technique was by no means equal to that of Changing Star. What was worse, she knew it far better than him, so his moves could potentially be predicted with terrifying ease. The only reason why Sunny was still on his feet was because of the elements of the saint's grounded style that he had incorporated into his own. Measured and precise, but also capable of explosive counterattacks. It allowed him to both defend against Neff's ruthless assault and restrain her to a certain degree, using the threat of a sudden reversal to keep her from going all out. More importantly, she was less familiar with that style, which allowed him to diminish the predictability of his movements. And now, with the help of the Blood Blossom, Sunny was able to resist Nephis more efficiently, even if it was just by a tiny amount. But the measure of that difference didn't really matter. Because the longer their fight went on and the more she bled, the stronger he would become. It wasn't long before he finally managed to land a hit, the tip of his sword scratching against one of her gauntlets. Sunny thought, "This is just a begin." However, his thought was instantly interrupted. Sunny stammered, "What?" Nephis suddenly changed her behavior. Perhaps she had sensed the shift in the dynamic between the two of them, or perhaps she was just desperate to end this fight before her powers ran dry and her terrible wounds finally caught up with her. Or maybe there was some other reason, one that Sunny failed to account for. But regardless of it, Neff suddenly abandoned her previous calculated attack pattern and instead descended on him in a rain of deadly steel. Her defense crumbling and leaving her open to retaliation. Caught by surprise, Sunny barely had time to shift his stance and block. The Midnight Shard was thrown down by a violent blow, pressing against his shoulder. The silver longsword slid across its length and scratched against the guard of the Takai mere centimeters away from Sunny's throat. For a few heartbeats, the two of them struggled desperately, trying to overpower the enemy. Their bodies were so close that Sunny could feel Neff's breath on his cheek as well as the heat radiating from her skin. Sunny cursed, "Damn it." She was just stronger, so much stronger. Little by little, her sword angled forward, and then bit into his skin, blood flowing on its silver blade. With an angry growl, Sunny let go of the hilt of the Midnight Shard with one hand. His fist shot toward Changing Star's body, the ghostly stiletto appearing in it at the last moment. But of course Nephis had anticipated that. She twisted her torso, allowing the Moonlight Shard to leave a deep but harmless scratch on her breastplate. In doing so, she had to relieve pressure on the Takai, allowing Sunny to push her sword away from his neck. But before he could jump back, Neff finished her attack by delivering a devastating blow to his head with the pommel of her sword. Disoriented, Sunny staggered back. He felt blood streaming into his eyes and lost his vision for a moment. Even shadow sense was useless, because he simply couldn't differentiate up from down right now. Suddenly, his heart was full of dread. Sunny urged himself, Think. He had maybe a fraction of a second left before suffering a complete defeat. Sunny thought, what is she going to do? The silver longsword was currently, raised slightly above him after the upward strike. The fastest way to finish the fight would be to bring it down, possibly with its flat on his head, or with its edge on his shoulder, thus severing one of his arms. Yes, the second option was the easiest to execute and the most advantageous. But it was Nephis he was thinking about. What would she do? Faced with the choice of protecting his head or his shoulder, Sunny instinctively threw the Midnight Shard up to block a vertical blow aimed at his skull. His body moved on its own, following the memory of countless hours of training. Thanks to that, he was able to perform the block even in this stunned state. His judgment was correct. The Takai collided against Changing Star's sword and was thrown aside. But thanks to that, the strike missed his head completely. Instead, it fell on his clavicle and bit deep into his flesh, scraping against bone. Sunny's world exploded with pain. But instead of letting it overpower him, he leaned forward and caught Neff's hand in a trap, entangling it with his own. Then he drove the Midnight Shard forward and felt it pierce soft flesh. Nephis shrieked, her voice full of agony and shock. Then she pushed him away. Sunny fell to the ground. Sunny groaned, damn, this hurts. Regaining some semblance of control over his mind, he raised a hand and wiped the blood away from his eyes. Then he rose to his knees and looked in the direction where Nephis had been. She was standing a few meters away, leaning on her sword for support. There was a deep gash in her abdomen, just below the lower edge of the fractured breastplate of the Starlight Legion armor, and a grimace of pain on her face. Blood was flowing from the wound he had caused her like a crimson stream. Their eyes met for a moment, and then Sunny lowered his gaze at the austere takai that lay on the floor between them. In all the mayhem, he had lost his sword. Both of them froze for a second. Then, ignoring the terrible pain pulsating in his wounded shoulder, Sunny lunged forward and grabbed the hilt of the Midnight Shard. At the same time, Changing Star rushed forward, raising her sword. However, neither of them got a chance to deliver a strike, because right at that moment, the Crimson Spire shuddered once again, this time much more terribly than before, and in a deafening thunder of breaking stone, the floor beneath their feet suddenly shattered and collapsed into the darkness, pulling them down with it. Sunny fell down in a rain of broken stone, the floor beneath his feet suddenly crumbling like shattered glass. The Crimson Spire shuddered and moaned, like a giant creature convulsing in the throes of death. The light of the artificial sun grew dim and weak, causing another tremor to run through the ancient tower, wide cracks appearing on its granite walls. Sunny had banished the darkness that devoured the Forgotten Shore every night, and Nephi's had killed the vessel of the sun that rose above it every day. Together, they had brought destruction to this cursed land. Today was the end of days for the Forgotten Shore, one that the two of them had ushered in, and one of them was going to have to endure the fallout of this cataclysmic change. Surrounded by a rain of falling shards of stone, Changing Star twisted and somehow managed to aim her sword in Sunny's direction. Even more miraculously, he managed to intercept it with his own. Both were thrown away from each other, the transparent wings weaving themselves behind their backs. For a couple of seconds, Sunny felt his body plunging down into the darkness. Then, finally, the dark wing fully manifested and turned into a blur supporting his weight. Dodging a massive slab of granite that threatened to crush him, Sunny used it as a step and propelled himself through the air. The Midnight Shard flashed, aiming at Changing Star's wings, but was blocked by the blade of the silver longsword. As the debris fell down, two human figures collided against each other and spun in the air. With nothing to serve as a support, the only chance they had to exert any force was to use the body of the enemy as one. Their bodies entangled, almost as though they were lovers. But in reality, of course, the purpose of this intimate closeness was not love, it was violence. Grabbing Nephi's with one hand and using his legs to trap hers, Sunny twisted his torso and delivered a devastating blow with his forehead, feeling the brittle bones of her nose shatter under his strike. But at the same time, her armored fist crashed into his side, aimed cruelly at the half-closed wound left behind by Castor. Sunny screamed. In the next second, her other fist slammed into his face. Augmented by the weight of the silver sword, that blow caused Sunny to lose himself for a short moment. When he came to his senses, the first thing he saw was a massive slab of granite falling on them from above. Feeling blood stream down his face and from the newly opened wound on his side, Sunny bent his knee, and then used Neff's body to push himself away. The two of them flew into opposite directions, narrowly avoiding being crushed by the enormous piece of stone. Gliding with the help of their enchanted cloaks, Sunny and Nephi circled around each other, moving down in a wide spiral. Both were too preoccupied with dodging the falling pieces of stone to launch another attack, even if they wished to. Around them, the Crimson Spire was quaking and convulsing, more and more cracks appearing on its walls, whole layers of stone separating from them and plunging down. It felt as though the ancient structure would not be able to hold on for much longer. Above them, the dying sun was growing weaker with each minute. And down below, the runes surrounding the perfect circle of the gateway were shimmering in the darkness, their light slowly becoming unstable, concentrating at the distant balcony. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then threw a glance at Nephi's. Then he dismissed the dark wing and plunged down, abandoning the safety of flight. Instead, he chose to fall. With air whistling in his ears, Sunny plummeted through the darkness, approaching the vast balcony with terrible speed, deadly speed. He had to calculate everything perfectly. When the gateway was close enough to discern separate runes shining in a circle around it, he summoned the enchanted cloak again. As the memory began to weave itself into existence, Sunny continued to fall, the stone balcony growing closer and closer. A second later, it was already close enough to see the shapes of the dead coral golems in the darkness. A second more, and a bestial fear took hold of his heart. He was about to die, to splatter on the ground like a crushed bug. Almost at the last moment, the dark wing finally came into existence. Immediately, Sunny activated the enchantment and tried to turn his vertical fall into a horizontal glide. As inertia pulled him down with dreadful speed, he cut a smooth arc in the air and hit the stone surface of the balcony, turning the violent impact into a roll. Then, without losing even a moment, he jumped to his feet and ran toward the gateway. Consumed by pain, Sunny limped over the shimmering runes and entered the ring. Almost immediately, a strange feeling overtook him. It was like that strange and indescribable feeling you get a few seconds before realizing that the reality surrounding you is just a dream and that you are about to wake up. The light of the runes grew stronger. Simultaneously, Sunny's own body began to glow, emanating the same ethereal light. Before that glow had a chance to become bright, though. A shadow fell from above in a deadly rustle of sharp steel. Sunny roared, "No!" Sunny threw his hands up, deflecting the blow of Changing Star's silver sword. Nephi's descended upon him like an avenging angel, the fierce white flames burning in her eyes with frightening intensity. As soon as her feet touched the stone inside the iron ring, the shimmering runes blinked and disappeared. Both conduits were cut off from the Crimson Spire, thus breaking the flow of soul energy. Without it, the gateway could not function. Only if one of them was thrown outside would the runes ignite once again. Sunny gritted his teeth and thrust his sword forward, hoping to get Nephi's before she had time to regain her balance. But she was too fast, too cunning. Before he could even get close to piercing her flesh, Changing Star was already moving, trapping his blade under her own and throwing it aside. Sunny rammed into her, throwing all of his weight into one devastating blow. At the same time, he felt cold steel brushing against his ribs, causing more blood to stream down. The two of them collided with frightening force and fell out of the iron ring of the gateway, rolling down the steps of the dais. As soon as the first of them crossed the circle of runes, they shimmered and shined once again. Sunny fell on the cold stones and remained lying there, consumed by pain and exhaustion. A low, tortured moan escaped from his lips. Something was broken inside of him. He felt weak and cold. He didn't want to stand up. Sunny gasped, "I'm not done yet, I'm not." Sunny lay on the ground, gulping air like a dying fish. It felt as though he was drowning. His body was a map of pain. He couldn't even remember how many injuries he had received. There was the gash in his side left by Castor's giant, the gruesome wound that almost severed his clavicle, the long cut across his ribs, and many smaller ones. But he was still alive. He was still able to fight. He was still not willing to give up. All around him, Crimson Spire was trembling and groaning, slowly starting to collapse. Gritting his teeth, Sunny tiredly pushed himself off the ground. His body protested, but he forced it into silence and slowly rose to his feet. The blade of the midnight shard scraped against the stones as he pulled it up. Nephi's was doing the same. The young woman stood up and staggered, then regained her balance and grew still. Her posture was slumped, with one hand pressed tightly against the deep wound on her abdomen. Changing Star looked weak and beaten, her fearsome presence diminished. Her face was pale, bloodied, and grim, contorted by a grimace of suffering. Only her eyes, which burned with dimming white flames, were still the same, striking, cold, and full of unshakable resolve. Both of them were washed in the ethereal light of the gateway. Looking at Neph through that light, Sunny slowly inhaled and said in a hoarse voice, Sunny said, "Let's finish this." She stared at him for a few moments, then grinned. Her teeth were painted red by blood. In the next moment, Nephi's raised her sword and dashed forward, sending a cloud of dust into the air with her feet. They clashed beneath the dais of the gateway, their swords whistling through the air like hungry fiends. The clangor of steel drowned the sound of breaking stone, resounding in the darkness of the Crimson Spire once again. Both Sunny and Nephi's were gruesomely wounded, but neither allowed their agony and pain to make them weaker. Instead, they fought with ruthless ferociousness, throwing everything they had left at the enemy, not holding anything back. Now that Changing Star was bleeding heavily, The blood blossom hanging on Sunny's neck entered a state of frenzy. At times, it felt as though his sword moved on its own, helping him strike faster, harder, with deadlier precision. He had never been as powerful as he was now, and yet it was not enough. Nephise was still too much for him to handle. She was still too strong, too fast, too overwhelming. She was more like a monster than a human, a demon of silver steel wreathed in pale white flames. Sunny managed to add several deep cuts to her harrowing collection of injuries, but the damage he received in return was twice as terrible. His left arm was slowly growing numb, weakening his grip on the hilt of the midnight shard. His lungs were burning, and it was getting harder and harder to inhale. With each breath, a wet, disturbing sound fell from his lips. His eyes were burning too, his vision becoming blurry because of all the blood streaming into them. He had to rely on shadow sense a lot to make up for this debilitating affliction. Sunny gasped, I can't go on like this." He had to think of something devious and smart, something that would work. But for the first time, Sunny's bag of tricks was empty. No matter how much he thought, he couldn't imagine anything that would defeat Nephise. She knew him too well, better than anyone in the entire world. 2 worlds even. And yet, Sunny felt that he had no chance of victory if everything continued as it had. He was already just 1 step away from death, and so he did the one thing he could think of, a desperate gamble with little chance of success. Summoning all of his remaining strength and resilience, he forced his perception to shift, and started weaving the strange, taxing movements of the incomplete shadow dance into his technique. He allowed his mind to become formless and shapeless, and then aimed it at Changing Star, trying to mimic her incredible battle art to the smallest detail, and use it as a weapon to destroy her. After all, if not Neph, then who could he ever imitate? He was the person who knew her best in the world too. He was her companion, friend, and pupil. He was already practically her shadow, her compliant little helper, caught in the net of her schemes and her insane, insatiable desire, and incapable of breaking free. Not only because there was no other choice, but also because he didn't really want to be apart from her. He knew her flowing, deadly battle style better than anyone except for Nephise herself, after all. He had practiced it as well, spending countless hours to master its foundation and gain insight into its principles. From repeating the same downward/100 of thousands of times to this terrible battle, he had never stopped learning from her. If he had a chance to make that one final step to mastering the first level of shadow dance, it was in a fight against her. And so Sunny fought, summoning the memory of the beautiful slave girl dancing with her 7 shadows. He strained his already failing body to its limit, past the limit, trying to force it to perfectly reflect Changing Star's deadly grace and fearsome elegance. Put under that strain, his body began to collapse. Sunny felt as though there was something brittle in the center of his chest, a small part of his body that was slowly cracking under the pressure. With each move he made, a new crack appeared on its surface. He just hoped that he would make the breakthrough before that small part exploded. If he could endure just a little more, do a little more, understand a little more. But in the end, he didn't. After another strange and excruciating move, one that somehow felt different from all the rest, the delicate thing in his chest suddenly shuddered and broke. For a moment, Sunny felt as a marionette whose strings had been cut. His eyes widened in horror, and then the midnight shard shivered slightly. In the next second, the invisible well of power hidden in his soul opened, and a flood of rejuvenating strength carried his exhaustion away.